A forbidden curse killed Shien E from behind in the abyss. He woke on Profession Awakening Day, with his second life restored. Then the crystal gave the former Spellblade the weakest class, Civilian. A mysterious system compensated him with one mythic passive every level. But it sensed a terrifying omen around Shien E and fled. His first passive ignored defense, while a damaged chaos awakened. That combination let the supposed civilian kill monsters above his level. Soon, elite professionals were facing a rookie who fought like the final boss. The proof came in Hell difficulty, where Last Whisper cut through snow wolves that should have resisted a level 1 civilian. Before that dungeon, Shien E had awakened in a classroom, with memories of the abyssal battlefield still fresh in his mind. Instead of dying for good, he returned to the morning when every 18-year-old student would awaken a lifelong profession. The world had changed after the Dark Star appeared, releasing monsters, demons, dungeons, and supernatural professions across human civilization. Combat professionals could join guilds or the military, explore dangerous zones, and earn fortunes from star cores and rare materials. Support professions still mattered, but their futures were usually assigned by states rather than shaped through battlefield progression. Shien E cared about one thing first. This second life gave him another chance to protect people he had already lost once. That included Mohan, the beautiful classmate, who had remained beside him from childhood through the darkest years of his first life. In that discarded timeline, Shien E became a top spellblade and fought constantly until war consumed almost everything around him. Mohan eventually died, saving him during a campaign against otherworldly demons, a sacrifice he had never forgiven himself for accepting. Seeing her alive again nearly broke his composure because she was standing only a few steps away and smiling like nothing had happened. He wanted to embrace her immediately, but Profession Awakening had already all begun, and every student was watching the platform. The Awakening Hall looked ordinary only from a distance. Every crystal result could decide whether a teenager entered combat, support work, or state assignment. Shien E remembered how mercilessly those labels shaped adulthood, because his first life had been built around a profession powerful enough to keep fighting. The memory of Mohan dying did more than inspire regret. It gave every decision in this second life a specific person he refused to lose again. Her presence also confirmed that the rebirth had returned him before the major disasters, leaving years of future knowledge available before history repeated itself. Shien E kept that knowledge hidden, since explaining a previous timeline would sound insane and could expose advantages he had not yet understood himself. Students around him celebrated flashy combat possibilities, while teachers quietly evaluated which awakenings might attract military academies, guilds, or elite university recruiters. Mohan's turn mattered especially because her family status and talent already made the room expect an exceptional result before she touched the crystal. Her hidden archer profession exceeded those expectations, creating immediate attention from school leaders who understood how rare hidden professions were nationwide. Shien E felt relief rather than jealousy, because her surviving long enough to become stronger mattered far more than comparing their starting professions. When his own turn arrived, he approached the crystal carrying the memory of a spellblade life that had once placed him near humanity's fighters. Their classmates treated Shien E as an outsider, despite his perfect academic record, because he came from a government orphanage without family backing. Mohan's obvious affection made that resentment worse, especially among wealthy boys who believed status should decide who stood beside her. Xiao Yan, heir to a powerful guild family, awakened as a summoner, and enjoyed the attention like his future had already been guaranteed. Other students received warriors, priests, chefs, and ordinary professions, with their expressions changing instantly according to what fate assigned them. Then Mohan touched the crystal and released a pillar of light, unlike anything the ceremony had produced that morning. She awakened the Nightwing Archer, an exceedingly rare hidden profession, exactly matching the path Shien E remembered from his first life. The vice principal nearly glowed with pride, because one hidden profession could raise the school's reputation across the entire country. Praise surrounded Mohan, but she still looked toward Shien E, as if his awakening mattered more than the crowd around her. Shien E stepped onto the platform, confident his former rare spellblade profession would return, and everyone waiting to mock him. Instead, the crystal produced a plain human silhouette with no combat markings, and the teacher announced the profession nobody respected: civilian. Laughter broke out immediately, because civilians possessed miserable growth could barely use professional equipment, and were considered useless in combat. Xiao Yan's expression turned smug. Certain the orphan standing beside Chin Mohan had finally been pushed into a permanently inferior world. Shien E's own shock was worse, because his starting attributes were pathetic compared with the rare profession he remembered awakening before. Then a notification appeared in his vision and announced that a system had detected his completed awakening and begun binding to him. The system rescanned him, discovered his profession could not be changed, and offered compensation for the impossible mismatch. The crystal's civilian result carried more than social embarrassment, because civilians normally lack combat growth paths, profession, equipment, and meaningful dungeon progression. Teachers viewed the result as permanent awakening. Rules did not allow someone to simply re-roll a profession after receiving an undesirable outcome. That restriction made the system's arrival immediately valuable. Since compensation mattered only if it could bypass limitations, the profession itself would never remove. The red color of the promised talents signaled mythic quality, a rarity so extreme that ordinary professionals could spend lifetimes without touching one. More importantly, the system tied those passives to level gains, rather than quests, money, or random drops, giving Shien E a predictable progression route. A civilian could still gain experience if someone somehow brought him into combat content. So the impossible profession was weak rather than literally unable to level. Shien E instantly reframed the problem around access. If he could enter dungeons and survive, every level would produce power no civilian should possess. His classmates never considered that possibility because they judged the profession by established rules, not by a private system nobody else could see. The first passive confirmed the loophole was real, giving his attacks a damage property that ignored the defenses protecting higher-level monsters. That meant armor, hardened hides, and defensive attributes could no longer guarantee safety against him, even before his raw stats became impressive. Instead of profession skills, Shien E would receive one red mythic passive talent every time he gained a level. That changed everything immediately, because red mythic stood above legendary and represented the highest known tier of conventional abilities. His first draw produced Last Whisper, a passive allowing every attack to ignore defense and deal true damage from his attack power. Critical hits became even more brutal under the same passive, adding an absolute destructions effect to targets already unable to block him. The ability was terrifying in principle, but Shien E still possessed only a few points of strength and needed a way to grow. Before he could celebrate, the pendant around his neck suddenly heated up, and the system started screaming warnings inside his mind. It detected a great ill omen attached to its new host, announced an emergency evacuation, and disappeared without answering Shien E's protests. The system that promised endless assistance lasted barely long enough to hand him one passive before abandoning him to whatever frightened it. Shien E grabbed the scythe-shaped pendant he had worn since childhood, and hidden information Tulfian fondled it in front of him. The pendant was actually a damaged chaos artifact called the Scythe of Immortal Fate, forcibly bound to him through an unknown origin. Even damaged, it granted 150 attack, a percentage attack bonus, and 10 additional points to every core attribute. More astonishingly, it added 20 points each to luck, comprehension, and charm. Rare attributes most people could barely raise at all. Its remaining abilities were hidden behind damage, while its known effect called Fated Encounter offered no immediate explanation of its true limits. Shien E had never heard of chaos artifacts, because mythic equipment was supposed to represent the ceiling of the world's item system. He walked down from the platform smiling, which Chin Mohan misunderstood as an attempt to hide how badly the civilian awakening had hurt him. The pendant had belonged to Shien E before awakening, but its violent response began only after the system connected with him and examined his fate. Warnings escalated from confusion into genuine panic, as though the supposedly powerful system had discovered something more dangerous than any profession result. Instead of solving the anomaly, it severed the connection and escaped, leaving Shien E with compensation already granted, but no guide explaining future behavior. The absurd treat told him one useful fact. Whatever followed him was serious enough to frighten an entity capable of handing out mythic talents. When the pendant changed, hidden system information identified the weapon as a damaged scythe of immortal fate, rather than ordinary jewelry. Its origin remained mostly sealed, but even the broken state provided attack power far beyond beginner equipment, and several percentage-based bonuses. The scythe also increased luck, comprehension, and charm, Secondary attributes, difficult to raise through normal leveling, and unusually valuable for rare encounters. No profession requirement appeared on the artifact, solving one of the civilian class's most dangerous restrictions before Shien E had entered a single dungeon. He could return the weapon to pendant form outside combat, preventing an enormous blood-red scythe from advertising his secret in public. Shien E therefore left Awakening with no functioning system interface, yet somehow possessed both a mythic passive and a chaos artifact. Nobody around him could recognize. She abandoned the admirers around her and immediately came over, more concerned about his expression than the praise surrounding her hidden profession. Shien E told her he felt better than ever, but she quietly decided her powerful aunt would examine him later if necessary. The ceremony ended with Mohan as the only hidden profession, and Shien E as the only civilian in their entire graduating class. Combat professionals were ordered to prepare for the beginner dungeon trial, where clear time and performance would influence their future assessments. That exposed Shien E's first practical problem. Civilians were not normally qualified to enter, and every attempt also cost valuable star cores. Without dungeon access, he could not gain levels. And without levels, the system's promised mythic passive compensation would become meaningless. Mohan noticed his frustration before he said much, and offered help the moment she learned he wanted dungeon access. The vice principal tried to stop her, warning that carrying a civilian would destroy the score of its most valuable hidden profession. Mohan listened politely, then ignored him and continued toward the dungeon entrance with Shien E beside her. Wealthy combat students immediately offered to join her, displaying rare starter gear and strong professions, in hopes of earning a place on her team. Xiao Yan arrived wearing a complete set of blue rare summoner equipment and proudly offered his mutated beast as extra firepower. Mohan agreed on one condition. Whoever joined her had to accept Shien E as part of the same team. Every volunteer backed away once that requirement became clear, unwilling to risk an important assessment for someone they considered dead weight. Their rejection only proved how completely the world's professionals had accepted the idea that Sicilians could never overcome their assigned limits. Shien E did not care, because this time he already possessed a weapon, one mythic passive, and combat experience from an entire previous life. Mohan quickly understood his practical problem and focused on access rather than joining classmates who treated the civilian result like a finished verdict. Beginner dungeons required authorization, and Shien E's profession gave administrators little reason to approve him as an independent combat participant. Her hidden profession and school importance gave her enough leverage to bring him as a teammate under her own dungeon entry. Xiao Yan tried inserting himself into that arrangement, presenting his equipment and summoned beast as proof that he deserved the remaining combat role. Shien E remembered Xiao Yan's character from the previous life and had no interest in owing him protection, favors, or information about his new abilities. Mohan chose Shien E anyway, making it clear her decision was personal rather than based on what profession looked strongest on paper. At the difficulty interface, Easy mode offered the safest route and would have been enough for her to demonstrate Nightwing Archer without meaningful danger. Shien E instead asked for Hell difficulties, because higher difficulty meant better experience, stronger trupsa, and a chance to test whether his passive truly broke defenses. No team in the country had cleared that beginner dungeon on Hell difficulty, which was exactly why teachers outside considered the selection reckless. Mohan accepted after seeing his confidence, trusting someone she had known for years even when the profession screen gave her no rational reason. At the dungeon gate, Mohan prepared to choose easy difficulty so she could protect him without sacrificing his safety. Shien E caught her hand, moved it across the selection panel, and deliberately confirmed Hell difficulty instead. The school erupted because the national record for clearing that beginner dungeon on Hell difficulty was exactly 0 successful teams. Even the vice principal went pale, convinced his only hidden profession student had just destroyed her assessment for a reckless civilian. Light swallowed the pair and transported them into Wailing Valley, a frozen landscape where dangerous packs hunted across narrow mountain paths. Mohan appeared in full rare archer gear, while Shien E still looked like an ordinary student with no profession equipment at all. The first enemies were level 5 snow wolves, with enough attack to remove an unprepared beginner from the dungeon in only a few strikes. Mohan planned to lure one wolf at a time, believing she would need to protect Shien E through every dangerous encounter. He stopped her, picked up 3 stones, and deliberately provoked 3 wolves together because he wanted to test his reborn combat instincts. As the animals charged, Mohan panicked because a civilian should have had neither the defense nor the equipment to survive them. Then the pendant transformed into a blood-red scythe, nearly 2 meters long, and Shien E rushed directly toward the incoming pack. His movements looked reckless, but every step matched timing calculations refined through countless life-or-death battles in his previous life. The scythe swept through all 3 wolves, and Last Whisper ignored their defenses so completely that 2 rotations ended the fight. Mohan stood frozen, while the supposed civilian protected her, reversing the exact role she had expected when they entered. The slain wolves dropped unusually generous equipment because Shien E's hidden luck value massively improved a drop rate considered ordinary by everyone else. The first snow wolves demonstrated the difference between game-like statistics and real combat skill, because Shien E moved before their attack animations fully developed. His first life experience let him read shoulders, claws, weight shifts, and pack spacing instead of relying on beginner skills he did not possess. The scythe's reach compensated for his lack of armor by letting him redirect charges and punish openings without trading unnecessary hits. Last Whisper made every clean cut matter, so he never needed to grind through the defensive values that made Hell's monsters dangerous to ordinary rookies. Mohan initially prepared covering fire, then realized Shien E was deliberately controlling monsters' positions, so her arrows could attract more targets safely. That role reversal left the hidden archer functioning as a puller, while the civilian handled close-range clearing, the opposite of every sensible beginner strategy. The faster pace accelerated experience enough that Shien E reached his next level before the dungeon's early sections were remotely exhausted. Infinite Potential awarded 150 freely assignable attribute points, an amount wildly beyond what normal level gains would provide. He prioritized strength and agility because his old fighting style depended on explosive movement, reach control, and ending exchanges before enemies could organize. The new stats did not teach him technique. They simply gave his already refined technique a body capable of reproducing movements from his strongest years. He could not equip the profession-locked items, so Mohan became the increasingly bewildered collector following behind his one-man clearing route. After several more packs, both gained a level, and Mohan's hidden profession received strong automatic attribute growth. Shien E's civilian growth looked painfully weak by comparison, proving the profession really was as terrible as the textbooks claimed. His compensation activated immediately, however, and the second red mythic draw produced Infinite Potential, exactly the passive he needed most. Every future level would now grant him an additional 150 free attribute points on top of the civilian profession's tiny gains. Shien E poured most of those points into strength and agility, recreating the close-range combat style that had made him terrifying before rebirth. At level 2, his raw strength already approached what an ordinary warrior might possess, around level 10. Instead of hunting one pack at a time, he found a narrow pass and asked Mohan to lure every visible wolf toward him. She trusted him enough to obey, firing several arrows and bringing a large pack charging through the snow in one furious wave. Shien E moved like a phantom through the wolves, stepping into openings moments before their attacks could close around him. Each scythe swing removed multiple enemies, while Mohan's Nightwing arrows drew additional packs without needing to carry the damage herself. 3 minutes of controlled slaughter pushed Shien E to level 3 and unlocked another red mythic passive draw. Soul Devour allowed him to absorb the souls of elite or stronger monsters and permanently convert their quality into additional attributes. His civilian profession still offered no active skills, yet 3 mythic passives already gave him more growth potential than most rare classes. The deeper valley eventually revealed a giant crimson snow wolf king, a level 7 rare elite with thousands of health points. Mohan asked for a plan, expecting careful preparation against a boss far above their current levels. Shien E simply told her to protect herself and charged before the creature could gain any advantage from distance or terrain. Last Whisper let the scythe carve through thick hide, while his past life footwork kept him beside angles the enormous wolf struggled to reach. Mohan supported with arrows, but even her hidden profession barely penetrated the boss's defense compared with Shien E's true damage. The wolf died without successfully using its strongest skill, and Soul Devour immediately added more permanent strength to Shien E. Level 3 introduced Soul Devour, another mythic passive whose value depended on killing elite-grade or stronger enemies rather than ordinary mobs. When such a soul was absorbed, part of the defeated creature's attributes became permanent growth instead of disappearing with the corpse. That distinction encouraged Shien E to seek dangerous targets, because elite enemies now offered both experience and lasting statistics through a separate progression channel. The Snow Wolf King became the first proof, combining high speed, pack control, and a tougher body than the wolves surrounding its territory. Shien E used hidden combat memory rather than brute force, drawing the king away from support before committing to the decisive exchange. Once its weakness opened, Last Whisper bypassed the defensive advantage that should have forced a long beginner boss fight. Soul Devour activated after the kill, and immediately made the boss valuable beyond equipment, confirming that elite hunting could snowball his permanent base attributes. The Ring of Life mattered for a different reason, since increased health and regeneration gave him room to intentionally manipulate low-health passives. Later, Chin Motion still received useful profession equipment from the growing pile of drops, preventing Shien E's unusual restrictions from wasting every reward. By the time they approached the final region, their inventory looked like the result of an optimized party, rather than two students on their first dungeon. Among the drops was an accessory with no profession requirement, something a civilian could actually equip, despite the usual gear restrictions. The Ring of Life added a large pool of health and constant regeneration, giving Shien E the first reliable recovery tool in his strange build. He kept pushing deeper while Chin Mohan watched beasts fail to touch even the edge of his clothes through increasingly dangerous encounters. Outside, the school's progress display climbed beyond anything recorded for hell difficulty, and spectators began assuming Chin Mohan was carrying him. The vice principal called reporters, convinced his hidden profession student was about to make history assist even with a civilian, slowing her down. Inside, Shien E reached level 4 and received another 150 free points from Infinite Potential. His fourth mythic passive was Undying Body, which prevented death when his health reached its final fraction and granted 5 seconds of total immunity. The protection carried a long cooldown and blocked healing while active, but Shien E immediately recognized its value as a deliberate combat tool. The dungeon's final zone was a rotting swamp dominated by a massive level 10 spirit python with 7,000 health and 4 dangerous skills. The python could crush targets hard, its scales accelerate suddenly, and blanket the surrounding area in continuous poisonous damage. Chin Mohan wanted to retreat, but she finally possessed the exact survival passive needed to challenge a boss built around unavoidable attrition. He accepted several high-grade healing potions from her, then approached the serpent alone, while keeping her outside the coming attack zone. Hidden weak points and old combat experience let him carve into the softer underbelly before the creature fully reacted. The python eventually caught him with a sudden speed burst and removed half his health, proving one mistake could still end the fight. Shien E adjusted instantly and never allowed the same surprise twice, wearing the boss down while preserving his strongest option. At low health, the python unleashed Venom Storm, turning the entire battlefield into a poisonous area with no clean route out. Shien E deliberately stayed inside the storm, continuing to attack instead of wasting time searching for safety that did not exist. His health finally reached the threshold, Undying Body activated, and every source of damage became useless for the next 5 seconds. Chin Mohan watched in disbelief as the civilian kept cutting through hardened scales, while poison and fangs failed to affect him. The spirit python collapsed before the immunity ended, completing a hell dungeon nobody in the country had successfully cleared before them. The Venom Storm fight taught Shien E exactly how Undying Body interacted with damage over time effects, something no description could demonstrate as clearly as a live boss. Once immunity triggered, poison ticks, direct strikes, and environmental damage all failed simultaneously until the 5-second protection expired. The passive did not restore health afterward, so victory still depended on finishing the python before that protected window closed. Shien E used the scythe's reach to stay on the exposed underside, rather than wasting the immunity against person scales. Chin Mohan remained outside the lethal zone, because entering would add no useful damage, compared with the risk of losing her to unavoidable poison. The boss died inside the immunity window, validating Shien E's decision to treat near death as a resource rather than an emergency. Clearing hell difficulty produced an evaluation far above normal beginner standards and immediately pushed their names onto a national record board. The public display credited both participants, but outsiders naturally assumed the hidden archer had carried the civilian because nobody could see his private passives. That mistaken assumption protected Shien E's secrets for the moment, even while the impossible clear attracted school officials, reporters, and curious professionals. He preferred the misunderstanding because fame at level 5 would bring enemies long before he had enough tools to control who investigated him. Shien E received the first clear bonus, reached level 5, and placed first on the National Hell Difficulty Beginner Leaderboard. The pair also earned an unprecedented SSS evaluation, a rating higher than the best Nightmare difficulty record previously known. Outside, reporters arrived expecting a routine school story, and instead found an achievement that instantly became national-level news. Shien E's fifth passive draw produced Echo of Desperation, increasing his attack dramatically as his remaining health became lower. At 1% health, the passive could multiply his attack fivefold, perfectly matching Undying Body's temporary protection from death. A second accessory drop gave him additional spirit and poison resistance, leaving his entire equipment set at only 3 usable pieces. The rest of the profession gear went to Chin Mohan, or became star cores, because Shien E still could not wear conventional combat equipment. When they exited, the crowd celebrated Chin Mohan as the hidden profession genius who had supposedly carried a civilian through impossible difficulty. Shien E intentionally kept quiet because public fame offered him nothing. Abilities would create more problems than benefits. Chin Mohan nearly told everyone the truth, but stopped after noticing his subtle signal that he wanted the misunderstanding to continue. Reporters asked why she had brought a civilian into hell difficulty when an optimized professional team should have produced a better score. Chin Mohan answered that having Shien E beside her gave her the courage to face everything, which sounded suspiciously like a public confession. Her words devastated the boys listening and made the reporters even more interested in the relationship behind the historical clear. Shien E left with Chin Mohan before the interview. Circus grew worse, while Xiaoyan watched from consumed by jealousy. Xiaoyan believed Shien E had stolen both the glory and Chin Mohan, and anger quickly pushed him beyond ordinary school rivalry. The vice principal treated Chin Mohan as the obvious star and framed Shien E as a fortunate passenger, which reduced the need for him to explain anything. Reporters focused on her hidden profession, family potential, and decision to challenge hell difficulties instead of asking how a civilian had survived the final boss. Chin Mohan repeatedly tried giving Shien E credit, but his lack of visible combat skills made the truth sound less believable than the convenient public story. Their first clear reward included an exclusive chest tied to his profession, proving the dungeon recognized civilian as a legitimate class, even if society did not. The chest produced Hidden Insight, an active utility skill rather than another passive, finally giving Shien E a direct ability he could consciously activate. Hidden Insight could inspect items, terrain, hidden properties, enemy information, and weaknesses when the level gap remained within its effective range. That function perfectly complemented his first life experience, because it turned educated guesses about vulnerabilities into confirmed targets for precision attacks. It also solved economic problems, since disguised materials and badly appraised goods could now be identified without relying on merchants or official evaluators. Shien E understood the skill was not flashy enough to impress spectators, yet information would often decide whether his other abilities were used efficiently. The systems had already fled, so every new discovery now required experimentation. Hidden Insight became the closest thing he had to a reliable analytical interface. Chin Mohan arranged a hovercar home, quietly revealing a far wealthier family background than Shien E had ever discussed with her. He already knew most of it from his previous life, and cared far more about gaining levels than questioning her family's status. Shien E told her he intended to leave the city because the cleared dungeon now offered too little experience for efficient growth. Chin Mohan warned that real monsters outside could actually kill him, unlike the protected simulations inside beginner dungeons. He remained determined, so she reluctantly agreed to help obtain the military exit permit a rookie civilian could never secure alone. Back in his small attic home, Shien E examined the exclusive profession chest, awarded for the first hell clear. A civilian-exclusive skill actually emerged, Hidden Insight, which revealed objects, environmental details, weaknesses, and enemies within a limited level gap. For someone carrying decades of battle instincts, reliable weakness detection turned tactical experience into an even more dangerous weapon. That night, a second transformation assassin entered the attic silently, with orders to kill Shien E before anyone could connect the attack to Xiao Yan. Shien sensed the intruder, but deliberately allowed the dagger to land, instead of wasting his chance on a long pursuit. The fatal strike reduced his health to its final fraction, instantly triggering undying body and echo of desperation together. For 5 protected seconds, the assassin could no longer damage him, while Shien E's attack increased to its maximum multiplier. One counterattack ended the threat, before the killer understood why a civilian had survived a clean assassination strike. Shien E recognized the uglier truth of his second life. Demons were dangerous, but ambitious humans could be just as lethal. The assassin's belongings included valuable professional gear that Shien E could sell, plus one exceptional item civilians could actually use. The Shadow Escape Cloak added agility, constitution, and spirit, while drastically reducing the chance of detection outside active combat. Its concealment became stronger precisely because Shien E's level was so low, making his apparent weakness another advantage. The following morning, Mohan delivered the exit permit she had promised, dressed casually, instead of wearing her school uniform. Shien E invited her to level with him outside, but she declined because her family had arranged separate training for her hidden profession. She secretly feared becoming dead weight after watching him dominate the Hell Dungeon, though she never told him that directly. Xiao Yan's resentment hardened after the dungeon record, especially because Mohan had chosen a civilian over the summoner who expected to accompany her. The attacker who later approached Shien E was far beyond a normal school bully, confirming someone had paid for a professional assassination rather than intimidation. Shien E recognized the danger early through experience and deliberately allowed the decisive strike to land under conditions he could exploit. Undying body prevented death, while the tiny remaining health simultaneously pushed echo of desperation toward its maximum attack amplification. That combination turned the assassin's supposed finishing blow into the moment Shien E became most dangerous. He countered before the attacker understood. The target was still moving, ending the ambush fast enough to prevent a prolonged fight from attracting witnesses. The dead assassin's belongings included a cloak, designed for stealth work rather than ordinary leveling, making it unusually compatible with Shien E's future plans. Shadow Escape's concealment became stronger because his level was still low, creating the strange advantage of being harder to detect precisely because he looked weak. The cloak could not erase scent, physical contact, or every specialized detection method, a limitation Shien E would later discover against unusual demons. He kept his suspicion about Xiao Yan private, because punishing the obvious beneficiary without proof could alert whoever had actually organized the assassination. Shien E accepted her decision and headed alone toward Modu's northern gate, which opened into the territories corrupted by demonic energy. The southern gate led toward mutated beasts, but the north offered more danger, greater experience, military merits, and the target he remembered. Military guards accepted Mohan's high clearance permit and let the suspiciously young civilian pass, without the usual interrogation. Outside waited camps full of guild teams, soldiers, merchants, and professionals, searching for partners before entering the demon-fallen lands. Shien E studied the bounty board and confirmed the military paid merits for demon materials, with enormous rewards for epic, legendary, and mythic kills. His real objective was not money, however, but a future disaster only someone reborn from the previous timeline could remember. The Qifeng district would eventually produce a mythic bone prison emissary, whose outbreak killed countless professionals and devastated Modu. In his former life, Shien E had been away when that calamity occurred and returned too late to prevent the losses. This time, he intended to find the demon while it was still immature and destroy it, before history gains the chance to repeat itself. Before leaving camp, Hidden Insight noticed one abnormal crystal hidden among ordinary amethysts on a merchant's stall. Shien E paid 10 star cores without bargaining, allowing the seller to believe he had just cheated an inexperienced rookie. The crystal opened a private dimensional storage space, spanning an enormous area, far beyond the capacity of standard professional packs. That discovery gave Shien E enough storage for extended solo hunting, materials, equipment, and anything valuable he found outside the city. He entered the Demon Fallen lands through one of the military sectors and immediately felt the oppressive demonic energy saturating the environment. Shadow Escape let a level 5 civilian pass unnoticed, even near experienced third transformation professionals, moving along the same routes. Leaving Modu required more than walking through a gate, because Demon Fallen lands were controlled military zones, where civilians normally had no reason to travel. Mohan helped secure the exit permit, once again using legitimate access rather than forcing Shien E to expose military-level combat power at a checkpoint. Beyond the city, merchants sold scavenged demon materials beside ordinary supplies, creating opportunities for hidden insight before Shien E even reached his target region. One unremarkable object contained the astral purple spirit crystal, a treasure hidden beneath an appearance too plain for its seller to recognize. Shien E paid the asking price without negotiating, preserving the merchant's belief that a naive teenager had overpaid for junk. After activation, the crystal opened a private storage dimension enormous compared with normal inventory equipment and inaccessible to outside inspection. That space solved logistics for long solo expeditions, letting him carry supplies, loot, monster materials, and future oversized trophies without revealing them publicly. Its secrecy mattered just as much as capacity, because valuable drops often attracted stronger professionals once information reached guild or black market channels. Shien E immediately treated the dimension as strategic infrastructure rather than a collectible, organizing supplies for a hunt he expected nobody else to understand. The destination ahead was chosen from future memory, a disaster-class demon that was still young enough to kill before history allowed it to mature. The first enemies were level 15 skeletons, ordinary demons whose tough bodies resisted conventional attacks but moved with almost no intelligence. Hidden Insight exposed every statistic and skill, while Last Whisper made their physical defense irrelevant to Shien E's scythe. 13 skeletons fell in a short engagement, granting far more experience than the low-level dungeon could provide. Their drops were poor, but every skull could be exchanged for military merit, and the dimensional space removed the burden of carrying them. Hidden Insight also revealed starlight grass, buried among the bones, a rare plant capable of permanently increasing spirit. Shien E consumed it rather than selling it, because permanent growth mattered more than ordinary wealth in a world ruled by combat strength. He increased the size of each pull, deliberately letting enemies graze him, until Echo of Desperation doubled his attack, with Last Whisper removing defense and the Ring of Life, restoring health afterward. Entire skeleton groups became efficient experience routes. Hours of relentless grinding finally pushed Shien E to level 6 and opened another red mythic passive draw. Impervious to all magic reduced elemental spell damage by 90% and granted immunity to harmful spell statuses including poison, silence, and stun. That passive transformed Shien E into the natural enemy of spellcasters, removing threats that normally defined high-level magical combat. He continued placing nearly every available point into strength, trusting his defensive passives and combat awareness to handle survival. While moving toward deeper territory, Shien E noticed a 5-person team being overwhelmed by a rare Bloodjade skeleton and its ordinary followers. The squad had already released a military distress talisman, but their shield warrior was close to collapse before help could arrive. When the demon targeted the priest, Shien E crossed the battlefield first and pulled her away from the incoming sword energy. Skeleton territory provided the ideal testing ground because the enemies were stronger than beginner monsters, but predictable enough for Shien E to fight alone. Their bodies resisted ordinary slashing through structure rather than armor, giving him another chance to verify that Last Whisper ignored unconventional defenses as well. Hidden Insights highlighted useful drops among piles of low-value bone material, saving time he otherwise would have spent carrying worthless loot. He also discovered Starlight Grass, a consumable capable of permanently improving attributes, rather than providing only temporary combat effects. Shien E used it immediately, following the same principle that had guided Soul Devour. Permanent growth outweighed short-term profit whenever survival allowed. Reaching level 6 granted impervious to all magic, one of the most strategically important passives he had obtained, despite its simple description. The passive reduced spell damage by 90%, and made harmful magical status effects effective, removing curses, control, and elemental pressure from many future fights. Physical attacks still remained dangerous, so Shien E did not confuse magical immunity with invincibility. He simply gained a massive favorable matchup against casters. That advantage became visible when he encountered a 5-person team trapped by a rare blood jade skeleton and joined before their formation completely collapsed. He dismantled the threat quickly enough that the rescued professionals assumed his civilian label had to be some kind of concealment rather than an actual profession. The rescued group assumed their mysterious savior was a high-level military expert because no level 6 civilian should have moved that quickly. Shien E told them to protect themselves, then entered the skeleton formation and deliberately lowered his health to activate Echo of Desperation. Ordinary skeletons became one-hit targets, while Hidden Insight exposed the Blood Jade skeleton's recovery mechanic and attack patterns. The rare demon lost every exchange once Shien E closed distance, because its sword techniques could not overcome his timing and true damage. Soul Devour added more attributes after the kill, while the boss dropped star cores, gauntlets, and a valuable crystal sword. The grateful team asked whether he belonged to the legendary Wings of Purification, and Shien E let their assumption stand without correcting them. Minutes later, an actual Wings of Purification assassin named Su Inshan arrived after sensing the distress signal. She learned another supposed member had already saved the team and quietly wondered who had been operating her assigned region. Shien E spent the night hidden inside a hollow tree, planning to reach level 7 before entering the Qifeng district's most dangerous interior. Another half-day of skeleton hunting completed that goal and activated his 7th MYTHIC passive draw. Skyrift Flash multiplied damage when he struck an enemy's weakness, giving Hidden Insight and his old combat instincts a devastating offensive payoff. With weakness detection, true damage, and extreme strength now stacked together, bosses with exposed flaws could be erased before their superior levels mattered. Shien E entered the Qifeng district and moved past higher-level demons toward the cave, where the future calamity should still be developing. The cave entrance alone held level 30 demons, proving the army's decision not to casually clear the area had been understandable. Shadow Escape carried him between patrol gaps, deeper toward a threat he knew would become almost unstoppable if allowed to mature. The grateful team mentioned Wings of Purification because its operatives were famous for appearing in demon territory, far beyond what ordinary travelers attempted. Shien E did not claim membership, yet allowing the assumption to survive gave strangers a believable explanation for his equipment, calmness, and unexplained route. As he advanced, the enemy level climbed faster than his own, turning Shadow Escape into a necessary tool for choosing encounters instead of fighting everything. Hidden Insight also began losing detail against targets too far above him, reminding Shien E that even his analytical skill had practical limits. The deeper cave system contained narrow routes, where one mistake could trap him between elite demons, rather than leaving open space for disengagement. Level 7 arrived before the main target and brought Skyrift Flash, a passive built around accurately strike identified weaknesses. Its critical multiplier turned Hidden Insight from a scouting ability into an offensive engine because confirmed vulnerabilities now produced explosive finishing damage. Shien E's previous life technique made those tiny openings realistic targets instead of theoretical weak points. He lacked the precision to reach. He planned the Bone Prison fight around that interaction, knowing raw statistics alone were not enough to defeat a mythic enemy above his level. Before reaching it, however, he discovered someone else moving through the cave with stealth sophisticated enough to fool almost every ordinary monster. Far inside the cave, demon levels climbed into the 40s, making even the terrain around Shien E more dangerous than ordinary battlefield zones. 2 7-star epic Dark Tongue demons guarded the deeper route, creatures notorious for sensing movement through hundreds of nerve-rich structures along their tongues. Shien E could not simply slip past them, because Shadow Escape hid his presence, not the physical scent and movement those monsters tracked. While he calculated another route, a nearly invisible assassin moved through the darkness and attempted to cross the same blockade. Hidden Insight revealed her as Su Inshan, the future #1 assassin Shien E remembered fighting Facade in his previous life. Her stealth was extraordinary, but she did not know the dark-tongued demons sensed prey through methods unrelated to ordinary vision. The creatures detected her instantly, forcing Su Inshan into a desperate escape against enemies more than 10 levels above her. One strike tore through her defense, and another pursuit route drove her toward a deep opening, with almost no health remaining. Shien E refused to watch an old comrade die again. even though the woman currently had no memory of ever knowing him. He entered the chase, wrapped an arm around Su Shan, and took a killing blow across his own back while carrying her forward. Undying body triggered as his health reached its final fraction, giving him exactly enough time to dive with her into the black opening. They fell more than 100 meters, and Shien E used the last moments of immunity to protect Su and Shan from the impact below. The landing left him unable to respond immediately, and Su and Shan panicked after realizing the stranger had saved her twice in seconds. She used emergency treatment and even mouth-to-mouth breathing before Shien E recovered enough to reveal he had survived the fall. The famously cold assassin was embarrassed by the situation, while Shien E found the contrast with her legendary future reputation unexpectedly amusing. He introduced himself, and Su and Shan returned her name, after confirming that this possible level 7 stranger was somehow still alive. Her detection showed only his level and civilian profession, creating even more questions about how he had reached territory avoided by stronger teams. With the upper route blocked, Su and Shan suggested moving deeper through the only remaining passage and treating retreat as impossible for now. Their path opened into a massive bone chamber containing the immature bone prison emissary Shien E had come to destroy. The mythic demon was only level 17, but its attributes already surpassed ordinary professionals by a terrifying margin. Su and Shan had entered the cave for her own mission, carrying assassin techniques that would eventually make her famous throughout humanity's future war. Shien E recognized her from that future immediately, but revealing a relationship she had never experienced would only make him look suspicious. The two dark-tongued demons were especially dangerous for her because their detection depended on sensory structures rather than the visual concealment us assassins normally defeated. When they reacted, Su and Shan's retreat routes narrowed almost instantly, and her low remaining health made even one clean hit potentially fatal. Shien E chose intervention despite the risk because he had already decided this second life would not repeat preventable deaths of people he once knew. Carrying her reduced his freedom to dodge, so he deliberately positioned his own body between the assassin and the attack that would have finished her. The fall that followed was not an escape plan he preferred. It became the only route left after Undying Body bought seconds instead of a safe battlefield. He used those seconds to rotate beneath Su and Shan and absorb the worst of the landing before the immunity expired. Her emergency response showed why she survived as an elite professional in the original timeline, shifting immediately from shock into treatment rather than freezing. The embarrassing mouth-to-mouth attempt happened only because she believed the stranger who had saved her was unresponsive, not because either of them understood the situation romantically. It possessed thousands of health, multiple control skills, summons, dark defenses, movement techniques, and the potential to grow into Modu's future disaster. Su and Shan immediately concluded the pair should retreat and report the discovery so the military could mobilize overwhelming force. Shien E stopped her because escaping past dark-tongued demons remained unlikely, and because leaving the emissary alive guaranteed greater danger later. He asked for 10 hours, enough for Undying Body to recover, and promised he had a method once his crucial passive returned. Su and Shan could not understand how a level 7 civilian planned to kill a mythic demon, but his certainty did not sound like empty bravado. At daybreak, Shien E walked openly into the bone chamber and deliberately allowed the bone prison emissary to notice him. The demon summoned ordinary skeletons first, but Shien E erased them quickly enough to turn its contempt into anger. He mocked the creature's small, immature body because his real plan required forcing it into close-range physical retaliation. Dark magic came first, including binding attacks. Shien E casually endured because impervious to all magic removed almost all their damage. The bone prison emissary grew furious when its spells barely affected a human 10 levels below its own combat tier. Finally, it used Shadow Hunt to appear behind Shien E and struck physically with enough power to empty his health bar instantly. That was exactly the opening he wanted, because Undying Body activated, an echo of desperation increased his attack to its maximum value. Hidden Insight had already identified the demon's growing energy core as its only meaningful weakness before maturity sealed the flaw. Shien E drove the scythe of immortal fate toward that core while Sky Rift Flash multiplied the weakness strike dramatically. Last Whisper ignored every layer of bone and flesh around the core, turning the demon's confidence in its defenses into a fatal mistake. The bone prison emissary disintegrated before Su and Shan's stunned eyes, ending a calamity that had killed countless people in the previous timeline. Soul Devour absorbed the mythic demon's power and awarded large permanent increases across all 4 core attributes at once. The kill also dropped an extraordinary mythic assassin gauntlet that Shien E could not wear because of his civilian profession. He kept the other materials, then escaped the collapsing cave with Su In Shan, while the remaining Dark Tongue demons were cut off by falling stone. Outside, Shien E offered Su In Shan the mythic gauntlet for 1,000 star cores, an absurd price compared with its true value. The immature Bone Prison emissary controlled the chamber like a future calamity already, practicing with abilities that would become catastrophic after enough growth. Shien E refused to attack during the night because Undying Body had not fully recovered, and fighting without that safeguard would waste his reincarnation advantage. Waiting also let him observe patrol patterns, summoned creatures, and the conditions surrounding the demon's movement skill, instead of charging on memory alone. At dawn, he exposed himself deliberately and used provocation to make the emissary abandon safer ranged abilities for the physical strike he wanted. The demon cycled through dark control and summoned pressure first, but magical reduction and careful movement denied those options, the decisive result it expected. Shien E kept presenting openings that looked increasingly desperate, encouraging the enemy to believe a close-range execution would finally finish the irritating civilian. Shadow Hunt placed the demon exactly where his previous life knowledge predicted, while the impact triggered Undying Body rather than killing him. Hidden Insight confirmed the vulnerable core during that brief protected moment, and Sky Rift Flash amplified the precision strike landing there. Last Whisper removed remaining defensive calculation, allowing one properly placed attack to end a mythic enemy, with statistics far above Shien E's level. Su In Shan understood only the visible outcome. A level 7 civilian had just killed something her own high-level instincts considered overwhelmingly dangerous. She misunderstood the generosity as romantic interest, and carefully told him that the two of them could never become a couple. Shien E realized too late what she thought he meant, while Su In Shan left determined to repay the item's enormous difference in value later. Back at the military command, Su In Shan reported everything and produced the mythic gauntlet as proof when senior officers doubted her story. A level 7 civilian one-shotting a mythic demon sounded ridiculous until an actual mythic item appeared directly in front of the commanders. At the merit exchange, Shien E presented hundreds of demon materials and the Bone Prison emissary's core for official credit. Soul Devour absorbed the mythic target's attributes after death, making the victory permanently valuable even before Shien E examined any physical drops. The demon's removal also erased a future event Shien E remembered clearly, because this same creature would have devastated Modu after completing its growth. Among the loot was a mythic assassin gauntlet, almost perfectly suited to Su In Shan. While Shien E himself could not exploit its profession-focused design, he offered it for only 2,000 star cores, a token price compared with its real value, because strengthening a future ally served him better than hoarding it. Su In Shan had no context for his past life gratitude, and therefore searched for a present-day motive that explained why a stranger would surrender such equipment. Her conclusion was romantic, leading to an awkward warning that whatever he felt could not become a relationship between them. Shien E found the misunderstanding ridiculous, but did not expose the reincarnation truth simply to correct her interpretation of a bargain. The exchange nevertheless created a connection with someone who would later become one of humanity's most capable assassins if history still developed similarly. Shien E then gathered proof of the mythic kill and returned toward military territory rather than remaining in the cave after achieving his real objective. The merit system valued the target so highly that his accumulated contribution exceeded 1 million points, far beyond what anyone expected from a teenage outsider. The total surpassed 1 million merit points, enough to qualify an outside professional for the highest honorary military rank available. General Seuss and several brigadier generals arrived expecting an older veteran, and instead found the same teenager they had been discussing. General Su recognized Shien E from the Hell Dungeon leaderboard and immediately connected him to Su In Shan's unbelievable report. The military awarded Shien E a brigadier general medal that also concealed his detailed attributes from ordinary detection skills. General Su then offered an even greater opportunity: join the Demon Suppression Army and receive its finest training resources and future real command. Shien E seriously considered it, because military backing had once defined his entire first life and could accelerate his second one as well. Then he remembered how completely battle had consumed him before, leaving no time for Chin Mohan or the ordinary life he never experienced. He declined the offer and chose to take the college entrance exam instead, wanting this life to follow a path his former self never tried. General Su respected the decision and allowed Shien E to spend his merits in the military vault without losing his honorary status. Most equipment remained unusable to a civilian, so Shien E focused on special items with no profession requirements. Military merit could normally be exchanged for equipment, resources, or privileges, but crossing that threshold also qualified Shien E for an extraordinary honorary commission. The resulting brigadier general rank did not mean he suddenly commanded a conventional army unit. Yet the medal carried authentic authority throughout military systems. General Su personally recognized the value behind the record and offered Shien E a more direct future inside Fadhi's armed forces. In his first life, accepting would have seemed natural because constant warfare had already consumed his youth and defined his identity. This time, Shien E wanted experiences that war had stolen, including university, ordinary friendships, and the chance to stay near Chin Mohan before disaster arrived. He therefore refused permanent military recruitment, without rejecting cooperation, keeping both civilian freedom and access to people who understood the demon threat. The purple medal concealed sensitive information by default, preventing random observers from boosting the rank attached to someone who still looked like a student. That concealment later created repeated misunderstandings whenever ordinary officials saw his message before checking the medal's authorization. Before leaving, Shien E spent resources on the Spirit Eye Ring because its critical bonuses multiplied the value of precision attacks already central to his build. The accessory increased physical critical performance without requiring a combat profession, making it one of the rare pieces he could equip without fighting civilian restrictions. He purchased the Spirit Eye Ring, an epic accessory that sharply increased physical critical rate and critical damage. Combined with Last Whisper and Sky Rift Flash, the ring made every well-placed strike even more dangerous against high-tier enemies. Shien E returned to school in time for the professional ranking assessment, while Xiao Yan's assumed the assassin he hired had already killed him. Chin Mohan arrived, expecting Shien E, and ran past Xiao Yan the moment she saw him walking toward the campus entrance. Her relief made the failed assassination even more obvious to Xiao Yan, who could not understand how his second transformation killer had disappeared instead. Shien E noticed the shock on Xiao Yan's face and quietly confirmed the likely connection without confronting him before gathering evidence. Xiao Yan tried another public humiliation, challenging the civilian to join the professional ranking assessment and prove he belonged there. Shien E accepted the assessment, but refused a free spar, explaining that Xiao Yan would need to make the fight financially worthwhile. The school tournament decided which students would receive recommendation slots for the Imperial Capital's special university entrance exam. Chin Mohan dominated her early matches with improved Nightwing techniques, while a mysterious hidden profession named Lu Tianing also drew attention. Lu Tianing's Dragon Slayer class and level placed him among the strongest students, despite nobody recognizing him from their regular classes. When public challenge slots opened, Xiao Yan taunted Shien E again, certain a civilian would avoid entering a real combat arena. Shien E offered a duel for 3,000 star cores, turning the insult into a wager far beyond what most students carried personally. Xiao Yan gathered the missing money from classmates, who expected him to crush the arrogant civilian and split easy profit afterward. Inside the arena, the display revealed Shien E had already reached level 7, surprising students who thought civilians barely progressed at all. Returning to school placed Shien E back among students who still understood him through the civilian awakening, rather than through anything accomplished outside the city. Xiao Yan treated the unchanged profession label as proof the dungeon record had been an anomaly, and continued using expensive summoner gear as social leverage. The ranking assessment offered Shien E a cleaner answer than accusations about the assassination, because a public duel could establish strength without revealing private evidence. He accepted Xiao Yan's challenge only after attaching a wager worth 3,000 star cores, making the rival pay materially for insisting the civilian was helpless. Shien E deliberately used a single punch rather than exposing the scythe, mythic passives, or military identity in front of the entire school. The impact ended the fight before Xiao Yan's expensive equipment could create the prolonged demonstration he had expected. Losing the wager damaged more than pride, since those star cores represented real progression resources, rather than meaningless school points. Teachers who had ignored Shien E now had to reconcile a civilian profession with physical power clearly beyond ordinary students at the same level. Shien E still avoided presenting a full explanation, because public disbelief remained safer than turning every guild and family into investigators hunting his secrets. The assessment then shifted attention toward genuinely strong students, including Lu Tianning, whose Dragon Slayer profession made him a much more serious combat prospect. Xiao Yan still believed the level meant nothing, because civilian growth was famously terrible, and his own summoner equipment offered real combat power. Before Xiao Yan could complete a summon, Shien E crossed the arena and struck him once with an ordinary fist. Last Whisper ignored the summoner's defenses, and Shien E's abnormal strength removed his entire health bar in a single impact. The arena announced Shien E as winner, before the crowd understood what had happened, leaving the supposed easy money contributors furious. Shien E calmly collected the full wager and Xiao Yan's ranking position, while the lenders surrounded their chosen champion, demanding refunds. Most spectators decided the duel had somehow been a scam, because accepting a civilian's real strength was harder than imagining hidden cooperation. Xiao Yan eventually fought his way back into the qualifying group, but his reputation suffered badly after 2 public defeats and the lost star cores. During the official bracket, Shien E deliberately surrendered every unnecessary match because rankings without tangible rewards meant nothing to him. The vice principal interpreted that attitude as arrogance, but Shien E simply wanted to return outside to the city and continue meaningful progression. Mohan and Lu Tianning reached the final, creating a duel between 2 hidden professions with completely different combat styles. Lu Tianning used explosive melee pressure, while Mohan's improved agility let her slide away in answers with continuous ranged attacks. When the Dragon Slayer finally closed distance, Mohan activated Nightwing Flowing Wind and rose into the air on luminous wings. Flight was normally associated with far higher transformations, leaving the entire school stunned by an ability unlocked for level 10. The skill came from her own exclusive Hell Clear reward, just as Shien E had received hidden insights from this same historical achievement. Lu Tianning lacked a reliable answer to sustained airborne pressure and eventually dissolved under the rain of arrows. Lu Tianning's identity surprised classmates because he had kept such a powerful hidden profession from becoming the center of school attention before the assessment. His Dragon Slayer class favored aggressive close combat and unusually strong defensive growth, making him a natural test for most graduating students. Mohan answered with Nightwing Archer mobility, rather than meeting that pressure directly, turning space above the battlefield into part of her fighting range. Nightwing Flowing Wind let her hover and change firing angles, preventing Lu Tianning from simply closing distance through ordinary ground pursuit. The duel became a demonstration of control rather than raw damage, with Mohan repeatedly forcing him to spend movement before earning any chance to attack. Her eventual victory secured first place on merit and showed that her hidden profession had developed beyond the beginner dungeon version Shien E first saw. Shien E did not contest the ranking despite possessing enough power to dominate it, because school placement offered little compared with protecting abilities still unknown publicly. He surrendered matches that carried no strategic value and accepted 20th place, confusing spectator who had just watched him flatten Xiao Yan. That choice preserved Mohan's public achievement while denying curious teachers a series of fights they could study for clues about his combat system. Lu Tianning, unlike Xiao Yan, interpreted the behavior as restraint rather than weakness, and began treating Shien E as someone whose real ceiling remained hidden. Mohan took first place, while Shien E remained 20th by choice despite everyone beginning to suspect his civilian label hid something abnormal. The school announced one final field in the Beastars world before the top students departed for the Imperial Capital exam. Shien E promised Mohan he would attend, then returned to the North Gate, because another level meant another guaranteed mythic passive. He asked General Su for access to the Wings of Purification, the Army's elite individual operatives who handled dangerous scouting and impossible missions. General Su already knew Shien E had killed a mythic demon alone and approved the request despite objections about his civilian profession and low level. The commander responsible for the wings initially protested, until General Su reminded him the new recruit technically outranked him as a brigadier general. Shien E received the elite insignia, mission equipment, high-tier demon intelligence, and a long-range receiver for distress signals. He immediately returned to the demon Fallen lands, using the network to turn rescue operations and high-quality on sightings into growth opportunities. Leveling through skeletons pushed him to 8 and unlocked soul-severing slash, another red mythic passive with a brutal execution condition. Any enemy below 10% health could be killed instantly by one successful strike, regardless of how much remaining health that fraction represented. That passive solved one of high-tier combat's worst dangers, bosses entering desperate final phases after ordinary fighters had already exhausted themselves. A distress signal led Shien E to a civilian guild trapped by an exceptional evil spirit sorcerer and more than 20 summoned servants. The surrounding group nearly collapsed before seeing the Wings of Purification insignia on young stranger entering their battlefield. Shien E told them to defend themselves and charged through the summoned servants, whose slow movement could not contain his growing agility. Critical hits erased individual summons immediately, while dark magic from their controller barely affected him through 90% magical resistance. Joining Wings of Purification formalized the identity strangers had already guessed in the Demon Fallen lands and gave Shien E legitimate access to future rescue operations. The local commander initially objected to accepting someone so young and low-level until General Su revealed the honorary rank attached to the new recruit. Having a brigadier general technically below him in age, but above him in rank, created an awkward hierarchy neither side had expected. Shien E had no interest in using the title to interfere with routine command, so he accepted fieldwork instead of demanding special treatment. Reaching level 8 then granted soul-severing slash, a passive designed specifically for enemies who had entered their final 10th of health. Once the threshold was met, his next successful attack could execute the target outright, rather than continuing through the remaining health normally. The effect was especially valuable against bosses, since their most dangerous abilities often appeared precisely when health became critically low. Shien E immediately recognized the synergy with military teams capable of wearing down enemies that no individual at his level could challenge from full health. His first Wings missions therefore became more than grinding. Every deployment let him test where his private passives could solve problems standard formations struggled with. The organization also provided distress communication, mission intelligence, and legal reasons to appear in restricted demon territory, without inventing excuses at every checkpoint. The sorcerer tried stronger spells and control effects, but impervious to all magic, reduced the attacks and ignored the status conditions completely. Once Shien E reached melee range, Last Whisper removed the demon's shield advantage, and Soul Devour converted another elite kill into permanent stats. The rescued guild fled almost immediately after thanking him, because the calm young man smiling beside demon remains felt stranger than the monsters themselves. Shien E continued into the Frost District, where spell-oriented ice demons offered exactly the kind of high-level targets his build countered most efficiently. Snow enchantresses struck with freezing beams, shields, and storms, yet their entire offensive toolkit depended on elemental damage he barely felt. Shien E kept his health within echo of desperation's threshold, and slaughtered them fast enough to turn their death cries into additional pulls. 2 days of relentless hunting finally carried him to level 9, and another red mythic passive draw. Thunder Entanglement gave normal attacks a chance to chain lightning through multiple nearby enemies based on Shien E's spirit attribute. The passive solved his lack of area damage, allowing a single scythe strike to collapse entire groups instead of only the first target. Shien E ended the grinding session because the promised Beast World exercise with Chin Mohan was approaching, and he refused to forget again. Before reaching the city, however, the Wings receiver exploded with overlapping distress signals from multiple teams across the Demon Fallen lands. A large-scale demon riot had begun, flooding previously stable zones with rare and exceptional enemies far above their normal density. Shien E could not ignore people dying around him, so he moved from signal to signal instead of returning directly to his appointment. One trapped party had already been abandoned by a frightened warrior who fled alone, leaving the remaining members surrounded by flying demons. Shien E reached them and used Thunder Entanglement to turn his lack of ranged attacks into a chain of lightning through the airborne formation. An exceptional evil spirit sorcerer provided an early demonstration, because its defensive magic and control abilities normally forced teams into slow, coordinated engagements. Impervious to all magic, reduced the incoming spell pressure enough for Shien E to ignore the sorcerer's preferred range and close directly. Soul-Severing Slash was not even required once. Last Whisper collapsed the value of its magical protection, and Soul Devour rewarded the elite kill afterward. The rescued Wings members began treating the civilian classification as a private joke rather than useful combat information. Shien E chose the Frost District next, because its monsters depended heavily on elemental magic, matching the strengths of his current defensive build. Snow enchantresses that could freeze ordinary professionals found both their damage and control effects weakened against him before they established any rhythm. He also manipulated his own health carefully, keeping enough safety to survive, while allowing Echo of Desperation to increase attack output during efficient grinding. Thunder Entanglement arrived at level 9 and solved the remaining problem of clearing groups without a conventional area skill. Normal attacks could now send lightning into nearby enemies, so one close-range hit produced damage across formations, instead of only one body. That upgrade made dense monster packs desirable, but the sudden demon riot changed the purpose of those fights from experience farming into emergency rescue. The exceptional leader tried fear and confusion skills, but harmful status effects were precisely what his magical immunity already rejected.
He killed the leader, cleared the remaining threat,
and immediately departed toward the next distress signal without staying for praise. By the time he finally reached the city, Shien E had saved multiple groups and absorbed enough elite souls to gain nearly another level's worth of attributes. The cost was obvious. The school departure time at the south gate had already arrived, and Chin Mohan was waiting for someone who had not appeared. The vice principal delayed as long as he could, because Chin Mohan's mood mattered more to the school's future than one missing civilian student. When the final deadline passed, she reluctantly joined the group, but still believed Shien E must have been delayed by something serious. The Beast World exercise was supposed to involve low-level mutated animals on the safe outskirts beyond Modu's southern gate. Instead, another riot erupted and drove much stronger creatures into the exact region occupied by the school's students and military escorts. The worst arrival was a mature four-winged thundercloud leopard, an epic beast roughly equivalent to a fourth transformation professional. Military leader Mogang organized a defensive circle and warned every student not to attack the beast without orders, because shifting its attention meant death. The terrified students could only wait for reinforcements while their school staff could not handle this enemy. Chin Mohan felt one small comfort amid the crisis. If Shien E had truly missed the exercise, at least he was not trapped there with them. At the North Gate, Shien E finally learned a school group had been caught inside the Beast World riot and immediately suspected Hunko No. 1. The rescue mission required hundreds of elite soldiers, confirming the threat was far beyond an ordinary student training accident. Shien E joined the military convoy, using his wings authority, and learned the target was the exact thundercloud leopards surrounding Chin Mohan's group. The school Beast World exercise had been planned as controlled field experience, with teachers expecting students to face manageable creatures while learning formation discipline. Shien E's delayed arrival meant the group entered without him, leaving Chin Mohan frustrated but still unwilling to believe he had simply forgotten. The wider demon riot destabilized that supposedly controlled environment and pushed creatures into areas where their levels no longer matched the exercise plan. When the four-winged thundercloud leopard appeared, even school staff understood. The situation had crossed beyond anything students were expected to survive. Its fourth transformation status placed it outside the scale of graduating teenagers, with roughly 200,000 health before military intervention. The beast's flight, lightning affinity, and speed made ordinary evacuation difficult because scattered students could become targets. The moment formations broke, the vice principal prioritized keeping everyone together, while emergency signals summoned soldiers capable of actually confronting the creature. Military units arrived with shield specialists and disciplined rotations, gradually controlling the leopard without pretending any single student could replace the formation. Shien E watched rather than interfering immediately, because exposing his abilities before the beast reached an executable threshold would add risk without guaranteeing a kill. Hidden Insight provided only incomplete information across such a massive level gap. forcing him to rely on observable behavior and his execution passive's known condition. When the reinforcements arrived, Hidden Insight could reveal only fragments because the beast farmed Shien E's analysis limit. The visible numbers were enough. Hundreds of thousands of health, and a collection of lightning skills capable of controlling an enormous area. Shien E did not pretend he could solo a healthy enemy at that level, and let the army's 4th transformation commander take battlefield control. He moved directly to Mohan, apologized for arriving late, and confirmed she had survived the first phase of the riot unharmed. She was simply happy he had come at all, even though the two barely had time to speak before the battle escalated again. Hundreds of soldiers wore the thundercloud leopard down through disciplined formation fighting, while shield guards fixed its attention on the front line. Ranged professionals, including Mohan and her classmates, contributed whenever possible, while priests kept casualties from overwhelming the formation. Eventually, the epic beast fell below 10% health, the exact threshold Shien E's newest mythic passives had been created to exploit. Unfortunately, the Thundercloud Leopard entered its final phase first and began charging a domain-wide storm that would strike everyone within several kilometers. The military commander ordered full defense because there was no time to retreat and no conventional way to interrupt the unavoidable attack. Students broke down in fear as the Thunder Domain covered the battlefield, while Mohan quietly asked Shien E whether they were going to die. He promised nothing would happen with him there, repeating words he had spoken to her during earlier moments of danger. Then Shien E left the protection circle and sprinted directly toward the epic beast, while everyone assumed the civilian had lost his mind. Military veterans saw the wing's insignia beneath his cloak and immediately realized the young man charging forward was not an ordinary student. Shien E launched himself dozens of meters into the air, revealing physical stats no level 10 civilian should have been capable of possessing. The soldiers succeeded in grinding the Thundercloud Leopard below its final 10th, but doing so triggered the exact desperate phase Shien E expected from powerful bosses. A huge lightning domain began forming faster than the formation could safely retreat, threatening students and soldiers together rather than only whoever held aggro. Mohan's quiet question about dying cut through the battlefield noise and gave Shien E the personal reason to stop waiting. He stepped out before anyone could authorize the move, using magical damage reduction to cross an area that forced ordinary fighters backward. The domain still shredded his health because 90% reduction was enormous, not absolute, and the beast's raw level made the remaining damage meaningful. Shien E needed only one successful strike after entering range, so he ignored every temptation to trade attacks or demonstrate strength for spectators. Soul Severing / activated on contact, because the military had already pushed the leopard below the required health threshold. The exceptional beast died immediately, ending the domain before the incoming lightning could finish the trapped formation. That victory belonged partly to the soldiers who had created the execution window, a fact Shien E understood even while everyone stared at the civilian who landed it. For students watching, however, the distinction mattered less than seeing someone from their own school walk through a disaster class attack and finish the enemy. The charged Thunder Domain shredded his health during the approach, but magical immunity reduced enough damage for him to reach striking distance. With the beast already below the required threshold, one scythe stroke triggered soul-severing slash and removed every remaining point of health instantly. The forming storm collapsed before it could release, saving soldiers, teachers, and students who had been preparing for an unavoidable massacre. The school finally saw Shien E clearly, with the Wings of Purification insignia displayed on his chest, and no way to dismiss his strength as luck. Lu Tianing understood the gap immediately, because joining the Wings someday had been one of his own long-term professional goals. The vice principal quietly warned Xiao Yan that continuing to antagonize Shien E could bring disaster onto the entire Xiao Guild family. He had no idea Xiao Yan's hatred had already escalated into an attempted assassination, making that warning far too late to erase the danger. The kill and the elite demons from earlier pushed Shien E to level 10, technically the first major transformation threshold for ordinary professionals. Civilians had no transformation quest, however, so the world's standard progression system simply offered him nothing at that milestone. His next mythic passive was Time Distortion, reducing active skill cooldowns by 80%, which initially looked completely useless to a civilian with no active skills. Shien E accepted the disappointing draw because his existing passives were already absurdly strong, and future equipment might eventually make cooldown reduction valuable. The Thundercloud Leopard dropped a mountain of high-tier gear, but the military had done most of the damage and deserved most of the reward. Shien E accepted only one epic ring after the rescuers insisted he choose something for landing the decisive final blow. He immediately gave the ring, Thunder Feather, to Chin Mohan because its agility, range damage, vision, and lightning effects suited an archer perfectly. Chin Mohan hugged him in front of the entire school before realizing how many people were watching their increasingly obvious relationship. The wing's insignia on Shien E's equipment finally gave observers a credible institution to connect with his abnormal field experience. School leaders also realized antagonizing him now risked consequences beyond campus politics, especially once rumors connected him with restricted military operations. The vice principal warned Xiaoyan privately because family wealth could not protect a student who kept provoking someone tied to wings and high-level commanders. Civilians received no transformation quest at level 10. The milestone changed his statistics without granting the class evolution ordinary combat professionals expected. At that moment, his civilian build possessed almost no meaningful offensive active skills, so the mythic passive seemed wasted compared with his earlier draws. He accepted the result instead of complaining, because mythic progression was permanent, and future artifacts could eventually supply abilities worthy of cooldown reduction. The Thundercloud Leopard dropped an epic ring named Thunder Feather, but its bonuses matched Chin Mohan's archer development better than Shien E's current equipment plan. He gave it to her without treating the item as debt, reinforcing the partnership that had survived missed appointments, dangerous dungeons, and public scrutiny. Thunder Feather improved agility, attack range, and lightning-related performance, strengthening the same mobility style that had defeated Lu Tianing. Their public embrace created gossip immediately, but Shien E valued Chin Mohan's relief more than controlling how classmates interpreted the relationship. The exercise continued only long enough for the students to return safely through lower-level territory. Once the military secured the major threat, Shien E and Chin Mohan hunted together on the way back, now openly displaying a combat gap everyone else had spent weeks refusing to accept. Thunder Entanglement turned his scythe into area damage, while Thunder Feather pushed Chin Mohan's already exceptional ranged output even higher. By the south gate, even the vice principal understood the historical hell clear had never been Chin Mohan carrying Shien E through danger. The school announced the special Imperial Capital exam would begin soon, followed several days later by the regular national entrance examination. Chin Mohan asked what Shien E planned to do before departure, and he finally invited her to visit the Demon Fallen lands with him. She accepted immediately because the invitation mattered more than the leveling efficiency her family could arrange through private resources. At military command, however, General Su faced a crisis caused by the same demon riot Shien E had fought through on his return. Scouts and Wings operatives were disappearing around the Frost District, while every report suggested the true source lay deep inside forbidden territory. Intelligence confirmed at least 2 legendary demons guarded the inner route, making ordinary high-level reconnaissance almost impossible. Strong professionals produced too much energy for elite demons to miss, while weak professionals lacked the ability to survive long enough to gather information. General Su and the Wings commander eventually reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. Shien E's low-level and impossible combat record made him uniquely suited. A new mission arrived while Shien E was already riding toward the North Gate with Chin Mohan for the trip he had promised her. He apologized again, explaining the assignment was urgent enough that he could not delay it, even for something he genuinely wanted to do. Chin Mohan hid her disappointment and told him they would go together another time, refusing to make his duty harder with resentment. After the exercise, Shien E finally tried keeping the promise he had postponed and invited Chin Mohan to accompany him into safer Demon Fallen territory. The invitation mattered because his first life habits had repeatedly prioritized missions until personal relationships existed only in the spaces left between battles. Before they could leave, General Su delivered a reconnaissance task requiring exactly the strange combination Shien E now represented. Deep Frost District demons could detect the energy signatures of powerful professionals, making normal high-level scouts too visible before reaching the target area. Low-level professionals were harder to notice but usually died long before gathering useful intelligence. creating a gap military doctrine had not solved cleanly. Shien E's low-level reduced detection, while his combat record, magical resistance, and survival passives made the otherwise suicidal mission plausible. General Su provided Frost Guard potions as emergency protection and explained that information mattered more than fighting whatever controlled the Forbidden Zone. Shien E promised Qin Mohan. The trip was delayed rather than abandoned, deliberately recognizing the emotional cost instead of disappearing without explanation. Inside the Frost District, he encountered a deep scout who had already pushed farther than ordinary patrols and warned that legendary demons guarded the extreme region. The warning confirmed the mission had entered territory where fighting everything would be foolish, so Shien E shifted fully towards stealth, observation, and selective movement. Shien E took her hand and promised the trip with her mattered to him, making the interruption a postponement rather than another careless broken promise. At command, General Su described the mission as nearly suicidal and ordered survival to take priority if deeper reconnaissance became impossible. He also supplied several valuable Frostguard potions, each temporarily increasing resistance against the killing cold inside the deepest region. Shien E entered the Frost District using Shadow Escape, moving between high-level demons, whose attention would have locked instantly onto stronger professionals. The first blue frozen zone drained health continuously, but the Ring of Life barely restored enough each second to keep the damage under control. Hidden Insight revealed glacier leaves buried in the ice, rare treasures capable of permanently increasing frost resistance. Shien E swallowed every one he found rather than selling them because the mission depended on surviving an environment no normal rookie could enter. He eventually met the deepest surviving winged scout, who warned that the next region multiplied the cold dramatically and housed the legendary demons. The scout withdrew with completed intelligence, while Shien E continued alone because the scythe of immortal fate had begun pulling him farther inward. Inside the extreme cold Forbidden Zone, level 50 and level 60 demons filled the landscape, including multiple epic creatures. Rather than roaming independently, they were kneeling towards something in the distance, even two legendary demon kings, showing obvious reverence. That behavior explained the riot. Powerful demons had awakened together because something deeper had disturbed the hierarchy of the Frost District. Shien E had already gathered enough information to return, but his scythe's growing reaction convinced him an even greater secret lay ahead. He followed the demon's line of sight and discovered a magnificent palace beyond the frozen landscape, wrapped in violent storms. Above it, a masked woman in golden armor was fighting a colossal frost dragon, with power comparable to Shien E's former peak. Glacier leaves became strategically important because consuming them permanently increased frost resistance, rather than merely providing protection for one expedition. Shien E gathered every safe cluster he could identify, gradually raising resistance before committing deeper into an environment designed to kill through temperature alone. The kneeling demons were stranger than any patrol pattern, since elites and two legendary kings all faced the same distant location instead of competing. Their reverence suggested authority above normal demon hierarchy, giving Shien E stronger reason to observe rather than reveal himself with an unnecessary attack. The palace beyond them looked too complete for a random ruin, standing inside the Forbidden Zone like something protected rather than abandoned. Then, the mythic frost dragon appeared, a creature approaching 9th transformation strength, and completely outside Shien what Shien E could fight through ordinary damage. The masked woman opposing it wore golden armor and possessed enough power to survive exchanges that would erase most professionals instantly. Shien E searched his previous life memory and found no matching public figure, making her absence from known history almost as suspicious as her current strength. Her forbidden technique changed the battle, heavily injuring the dragon through power, obtained at a permanent personal cost. Shien E did not yet know the price was 30 levels, only that her aura collapsed afterward from near 9th transformation strength toward the 6th transformation. The woman wielded near 9th transformation strength and legendary equipment, yet Shien E had never seen her anywhere in his previous life. Her opponent was a mythic dragon, whose frost power reshaped the surrounding terrain every time the two collided. Their attention remained fixed completely on each other, allowing Shien E's weak level 10 presence to slip toward the palace unnoticed. Inside, he followed the artifact's pull-through halls, built from frozen wealth and star cores, until he reached a deep blue spring. More than 100 glacier leaves grew around the spring, proving the palace's owner had been cultivating around a source of extreme frost power. Shien E avoided several energy anomalies, gathered the leaves, and consumed enough to increase his frost resistance by another significant margin. Outside, the golden-armored woman used a forbidden technique powerful enough to pierce the frost dragon's defenses and nearly reach its heart. The dragon survived by forming an enormous crystalline defense, while the woman's technique permanently destroyed much of her own accumulated strength. Their collision shattered the palace and exposed Shien E beside the spring, with every treasured glacier leaf already missing. The enraged frost dragon immediately attacked both humans, turning Shien E's secret exploration into a direct struggle for survival. The masked woman's earlier forbidden technique had dropped her from near 9th transformation strength to roughly the 6th transformation, leaving her badly weakened. Shien E caught her when she fell from the sky, but the frost dragon immediately condensed 5 devastating ice crystals toward them. She tried gathering another suicidal forbidden strike, willing to sacrifice herself if that was the only way to kill the dragon. Shien E interrupted her, pulled her into his arms, and jumped directly into the deep blue spring before the ice attacks arrived. 5 impacts struck the scythe across his back, forcing his health to its last fraction and activating Undying Body once again. The palace's damage exposed Shien E at the worst possible moment, turning a reconnaissance observer into another target inside a mythic battle. When the weakened woman fell, he caught her reflexively, because letting someone die after spending his second life preventing old losses was no longer acceptable. She immediately prepared another forbidden art, showing she preferred self-destruction over allowing the frost dragon to recover and threaten the wider region. Shien E stopped the casting because sacrificing 30 more levels, or her life, offered no guarantee of a cleaner result than escape. The deep blue spring was dangerous, but hidden insight and the scythe's reaction made it the only route, offering both cover and unanswered information. He jumped while carrying her, placing the damaged chaos artifact across his back as the dragon's 5 ice attacks arrived together. Those impacts forced Undying Body to activate, proving the physical component remained lethal even after his existing frost and magical resistance reduced elemental damage. The spring itself continued draining health after the dragon stopped pursuing, so surviving the dive did not mean either of them had reached safety. The masked woman resumed giving orders almost immediately after waking, revealing a personality accustomed to command, even while trapped underwater with a teenager. Shien E followed her survival calculations until the scythe kept pulling downward, then chose to risk limited potions for whatever waited beneath the lethal cold. With 95% frost resistance, the elemental portion became survivable, but the physical force sent both humans plunging deep into the spring. The frost dragon pursued briefly, then stopped because even its own body could not tolerate the spring's deepest layers for long. Convinced the gravely wounded woman and level 10 rookie had died below, the dragon returned to the surface and began recovering. The golden-armored stranger reopened her eyes underwater and discovered Shien E was still alive, drinking recovery potions while controlling their descent. Once the danger of immediate pursuit faded, she ordered him to release her, restoring the distant authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Shien E apologized for holding her longer than necessary, while privately wondering how someone so powerful had never appeared in his previous timeline. She warned their escape problem remained unsolved because the spring continuously drained life, and the dragon was still waiting somewhere above. Her supplies could maintain survival for only a few hours, after which she preferred fighting the dragon again rather than freezing underwater. Shien E gave her some glacier leaves to improve resistance, then decided to follow the scythe's pull toward the bottom before their resources disappeared. The deeper he traveled, the faster his health fell until ordinary recovery potions could no longer keep pace with the environment. Turning back still offered a possible retreat, but the artifact's reaction told him the unknown source was finally close. Shien E committed to the gamble and used General Su's Frost Guard potion as his health approached 0. The temporary resistance stacked with his existing defenses beyond 100%, transforming the deadly frost into an environment that actually restored him. Near the bottom, a droplet-shaped object appeared inside the blue darkness, covered in crystalline patterns and radiating an impossible calm. Hidden Insight identified it only as the Azure Wave Seed, while the Scythe of Immortal Fate reacted like it had recovered a missing part of itself. Frost Guard created an unusual interaction, once stacked with permanent resistance. Because succeeding total frost resistance changed the spring from pure damage into sustainable exposure. That temporary advantage had a strict duration, so Shien E could not wander indefinitely after reaching conditions the masked woman herself could not survive. The Azure Wave seed sat near the deepest region, as though the spring existed around it, explaining why the scythe of immortal fate had reacted so violently. Hidden insight provided the name but little context, forcing Shien E to rely on the artifact, rather than a complete external description. Contact caused the seed to dissolve into energy and merge with the damaged scythe, instead of entering his inventory as an ordinary item. The artifact's restoration revealed that it had once been a creator-god chaos weapon shattered during a divine war, rather than merely rare human equipment. Azure Wave was only one missing seed. Life, Flame, Storm, and Stars remained somewhere in the world as future restoration targets. The recovered fragment massively increased base attack, percentage attack scaling, all 4 core attributes, and difficult secondary attributes like luck and comprehension. That growth was artifact restoration rather than a level up, allowing Shien E's combat ceiling to jump without changing the civilian profession displayed to observers. The scythe also changed from a powerful weapon into a source of active abilities, finally giving time distortions something significant to effect. The moment Shien E touched the seed, it dissolved into light and merged directly into the damaged chaos artifact. New information finally revealed the scythe had once belonged to a creator god and had shattered during an unknown war among divine beings. 5 special seeds contained the lost core power, and the Azure Wave seed was only the first required to restore the chaos artifact completely. 4 remained missing: the Seed of Life, Seed of Flame, Seed of Storm, and Seed of Stars. Even one recovered seed transformed the weapon from a strange advantage into something Shien E could finally recognize as overwhelmingly broken. Its base attack jumped to 1,000. Its attack multiplier rose sharply, and every core attribute gained a massive additional bonus. Luck, Comprehension, and Charm also increased from 20 each to 100, making already abnormal rare attributes almost impossible by normal standards. The weapon unlocked Azure Wave Domain, creating a water element battlefield that damaged enemies continuously, while doubling Shien E's attributes inside it. Azure Wave Instant allowed him to teleport hundreds of meters within connected water, with the distance scaling from spirit. Its ordinary cooldown would have been 10 seconds, but time distortion reduced that wait to only 2 seconds. The artifact also revealed the first of 5 immortal judgments: Azure Wave Soul Devouring Slash. That attack stripped 30% of a target's attributes, sealed its skills for 9 seconds, and dealt several times Shien E's normal damage. Time distortion finally stopped being useless, because the Chaos Artifact had given a civilian 3 powerful active abilities at once. The seed's disappearance caused the entire spring to lose its condensed frost energy, a change the recovering dragon noticed almost immediately. The masked woman also sensed the environment weakening, and correctly guessed the transformation had something to do with Shien E's deeper descent. Azure Wave Domain created a broad water-aligned field, where continuous damage affected enemies, while Shien E's own attributes doubled as long as he maintained the effect. The domain consumed mana continuously, so its enormous power still required judgment rather than remaining active through every ordinary encounter. Azure Wave Instant transformed his body through water for short-range teleportation, giving him movement no civilian profession could naturally learn. Its original cooldown was 10 seconds, but time distortion reduced that delay lift 2, immediately turning the previously awkward passive into a major advantage. The first immortal judgment, Azure Wave Soul Devouring Slash, combined direct damage with temporary suppression rather than functioning as a simple, stronger attack. A successful strike could strip roughly 30% of an enemy's attributes and seal skills for 9 seconds, creating openings against targets otherwise untouchable. Its long natural cooldown also fell sharply under time distortion, making the artifact's restoration multiply value across several abilities at once. Shien E understood. The synergy mattered more than any single number, because passive talents, artifact skills, and previous life technique were finally supporting one combat system. The restoration disturbed the spring enough that remaining hidden became impossible, forcing him to abandon further exploration before the Frost Dragon reached the source. He turned upward immediately, knowing the masked woman was still facing a wounded mythic creature. without understanding what he had just recovered below. Shien E hurried back upward before the frost dragon investigated. Understanding the artifact's recovery had just disturbed the enemy's most precious territory. When he reunited with the golden-armored woman, the frost dragon appeared again, enraged by the loss of both its palace treasure and the spring's power. Shien E asked the dragon's remaining health and learned it still possessed roughly 1 million out of 12 million total. That number sounded impossible until one detail changed everything. 1 million was already less than 10% of the dragon's maximum health. Soul-severing slash suddenly made the mythic creature killable if Shien E could simply land one clean hit. The masked woman prepared to sacrifice herself again because she believed her weakened sixth transformation body could no longer survive another prolonged battle. Shien E stopped her a second time and confidently promised he could kill the dragon if she created a chance for him to approach. She clearly did not believe a level 10 civilian could erase 1 million health. So Shien E made the wager personal. If he killed the dragon, she would remove the golden mask and let him see the face she had hidden the entire time. The frost dragon attacked before they could debate further, and the weakened woman was quickly forced back by its physical power. Shien E realized she was far weaker than during their first encounter. Unaware the forbidden art had permanently consumed 30 of her levels. With no safe path closer, he used Azure Wave Soul, devouring slash from range, and struck the dragon for almost meaningless direct damage. The real effect followed immediately, reducing the dragon's attributes by 30% and sealing every skill for 9 crucial seconds. The masked woman recognized the opening and attacked aggressively, finally able to contain an enemy that had just overwhelmed her. Shien E moved through the underwater battlefield, while she occupied the dragon, waiting for distance to fall within Azure Wave instance range. At the surface, the frost dragon had recovered enough to resume pressure, while the masked woman lacked the levels her forbidden technique had permanently consumed. She considered another suicidal art, because her original objective required the dragon's heart, and leaving empty-handed would waste the price already paid. Shien E interrupted that logic with a wager. If he killed the dragon himself, she would remove the mask hiding her identity. The request sounded absurd from a level 10 civilian, but the woman had already watched him survive attacks that should have erased someone at his level. The frost dragon still possessed around 1 million health from an original pool near 12 million, placing it conveniently below the 10th Shien E needed. He first used Azure Wave's Soul Devouring Slash to weaken its attributes and temporarily seal the abilities that made direct approach most dangerous. The masked woman recognized the opening and used her remaining power to restrain the dragon instead of wasting energy, trying to finish it alone. Azure Wave Instant then moved Shien E across the battlefield faster than the dragon expected from someone whose profession displayed no movement skill. He appeared on the dragon's head where a successful physical hit satisfied soul-severing Slash's final requirement. The execution passive ignored the remaining mountain of health, proving that weakening a boss into the fight's haunt could matter more than matching its total statistics. The dragon eventually noticed him and swept its massive tail toward the smaller target, expecting one physical strike to end the nuisance. Shien E vanished through the water before contact and reappeared directly above the creature's head. The frost dragon did not understand the teleportation, but still believed a level 10 human could not penetrate scales forged by mythic power. Last Whisper made those scales meaningless, and the scythe of immortal fate sank into the dragon's skull without resistance. Because the beast remained under 10% maximum health, Soul-Severing Slash activated and instantly erased the nearly 1 million health remaining. The enormous frost dragon collapsed beneath the water before the masked woman fully understood that Shien E had actually won their wager. Soul Devour converted the mythic dragon's power into enormous permanent increases, especially constitution and spirit. The experience from a creature so far above his level pushed Shien E from level 10 directly through 11, 12, and 13. Infinite potential triggered on every level gained, adding another huge pool of free attributes beyond the already massive Soul Devour reward. Shien E also gained 3 new mythic passive draws, but he postponed them long enough to inspect the dragon's extraordinary loot first. The masked woman took only the frost dragon's heart, the resource she had crossed the forbidden zone to obtain for her own breakthrough. She left every piece of equipment to Shien E because his attack had delivered the decisive kill and saved her life again. The first usable mythic accessory was the Frost Fang Amulet. adding spirit, critical rate, frost resistance, and a chance to slow enemies. Combined with his existing resistance, the amulet pushed Shien E beyond complete protection against ordinary frost damage. The second reward, Cold Fury Fang, was a mythic dragon head gauntlet, requiring only proof that its wearer had killed the frost dragon. The dragon's experience arrived before Shien E could process the battlefield, forcing several level notifications to stack, while the masked woman secured the heart. 3 simultaneous level gains also queued, 3 separate mythic passive draws, which Shien E deliberately postponed until pursuit and looting were finished. The absorbed mythic soul delivered a second permanent statistical surge, making the aftermath almost as important as the execution that created it. The masked woman needed the frost dragon heart for a transformation requirement and claimed only that resource instead of competing over every drop. 1 mythic accessory, Frostfang Amulet, boosted spirit and frost resistance while adding a slowing effect tied to cold damage. The Cold Fury Fang Gauntlet provided massive strength, defense, critical performance, and continuous health and mana regeneration in 1 profession-compatible item. Its active formation-breaking attack required a short charge and dealt heavy physical damage while also carrying a control component. Time Distortion reduced that active skill's cooldown to roughly 2 seconds, converting equipment designed around occasional bursts into something Shien E could repeat constantly. The 1,000-meter class dragon corpse would normally be impossible to transport, but the astral Percival Spirit Crystal's private dimension had enough space for the entire body. Shien E stored it intact, preserving scales, bones, flesh, and research value that would have been lost if ordinary teams dismantled the creature on site. The gauntlet added enormous strength and defense, high critical rate, and constant health and mana regeneration. Its active skill, Cold Fury Formation Breaker, launched a short-range dragon charge with heavy damage and multiple crowd control chances. Time Distortion reduced that skill's 10-second cooldown to 2, turning it into a movement and burst tool Shien E could use repeatedly. His equipment now gave enough attack that an ordinary strike could exceed what many transformed professionals produced with specialized skills. The masked woman completed her 9th transformation requirement with the dragon heart, even though the forbidden art had left her current level far lower. She explained that the dragon's enormous corpse could greatly advance human research if anyone possessed enough storage to bring it back intact. Shien E casually placed the entire 1,000-meter body into his private dimensional space, giving her yet another reason to stare at him in disbelief. The Frost District erupted after the dragon's life mark vanished, and the legendary demons outside realized their terrifying ruler was finally dead. Shien E and the woman fled before the gathering demon horde could surround them, moving through routes opposite their original approach. Her weakened state still surpassed ordinary 6th transformation experts, allowing her to kill pursuing demons while carrying Shien E away. Once the strongest pursuers stopped, Shien E finally used the 3 mythic passive draws awarded by the dragon's experience. Blood Shadow Fury granted 100% lifesteal from normal attack damage, making his extreme strength function as instant combat healing. Hyper Evolution multiplied every future source of experience, directly fixing the slow civilian leveling that had frustrated him from the beginning. Forbidden Lawblade drained enemy mana through successful damage, adding another layer to a build already designed to destroy spellcasters. With magic resistance, mana theft, lifesteal, true damage, execution, and enormous attributes, Shi's civilian label had become almost meaningless. Once pursuit ended, the 3 new levels produced 3 mythic passive draws, instead of forcing Shien E to wait for separate milestones. Blood Shadow Fury granted full lifesteal from normal attack damage, giving his aggressive close-range style a direct method of restoring health through offense. That healing would not function during Undying Body's immunity window, but outside it, the passive reduced its dependence on potions during prolonged battles. Hyper Evolution doubled experience gains, making future leveling substantially faster at exactly the point where higher levels normally required increasingly unreasonable amounts. Forbidden Lawblade periodically drained enemy mana according to damage dealt, adding resource pressure against casters already disadvantaged by Shien E's magical resistance. Together, the 3 passives expanded sustain, progression speed, and anti-mage control, rather than merely adding another version of raw damage. The masked woman handed Shien E a personal jade token after the escape, offering emergency contact in recognition of what he had done. She also honored the wager and removed her mask, revealing her face without providing enough public context for Shien E to identify her from past life memory. Her suggestion about Jinghua changed his next plan, because the university's research institute could value a complete mythic dragon beyond what private buyers safely offered. She further indicated that his special examination problem could be solved, implying influence reaching directly into one of the country's most prestigious institutions. The pair crossed into safer territory, and the masked woman gave him a personal jade token capable of calling her if he faced serious danger. She also honored their wager by removing the phoenix-shaped mask, covering the upper half of her face. Shien E understood immediately why she normally hid it, because her beauty was striking enough to draw attention anywhere she appeared. She replaced the mask after only a moment and declared their earlier debts settled, though both knew their encounter had changed more than that. Before leaving, she advised Shien E to donate the Frost Dragon corpse to Jinghua University rather than trade it only for military merit. Jinghua possessed the country's strongest demon research institute and could exchange a contribution of that magnitude for mythic equipment or equivalent value. Shien E mentioned he was already heading to the imperial capital for Jinghua's special entrance examination. The masked woman was visibly confused that someone who killed a mythic dragon still cared about taking a freshman university exam. After checking the schedule, she realized the early rounds had probably started, but believed she could arrange direct entry into the later stage. The two headed toward a military airfield, where Shien E used his wings insignia and brigadier general authority to requisition rapid transport. A receptionist nearly panicked when the teenager walked toward a plane reserved for general-level dispatch before seeing his authentic purple medal. The masked woman had already seen impossible combat from him, yet even she was surprised a level 13 civilian carried brigadier general authority. Shien E explained. He received the rank after casually killing a mythic demon earlier, making the official achievement sound almost ridiculous. During the flight, he finally slept while the masked woman studied the mysterious student who had repeatedly disrupted every assumption she made. In the imperial capital, Jinghua University's special exam had already eliminated almost every applicant through its first team coordination screening. Travel to the imperial capital became urgent, because the Jinghua special examination had already progressed, while Shien E remained deep inside military territory. His brigadier general medal allowed access to a military special plane, a privilege that surprised Steph, who saw only a teenager carrying ordinary-looking luggage. Even the masked woman reacted to the authentic rank, learning that Shien E's connection to the military was far deeper than his level suggested. Jinghua's examination had begun with roughly 100,000 applicants competing for places at the country's most prestigious combat university. Only about 1,000 survived the first stage, and the second trial further measured hunting efficiency, deaths, and performance under controlled combat conditions. The best 100 from that trial qualified for admission, but a separate ranking tournament determined statistics, rewards, and attention from the 5 colleges. 27 top performers plus 5 direct college recommendations created a 32-person final bracket. Winning the tournament offered mythic equipment, enough value that elite families treated the ranking as more than ceremonial prestige. Shien E had missed both earlier stages entirely, so reaching the final bracket required someone with university authority to spend a recommendation slot on him. While he traveled, Mohan entered the second trial believing he had failed to arrive, yet still pushed herself to finish at the top. Roughly 1,000 students from 50 elite high schools remained out of an original field many times larger. Hunko No. 1 survived because Mohan, Lu Tianing, and the school's stronger students performed well even without Shien E present. The second round required individual monster hunting inside a large dungeon, with only the top 100 earning actual admission. The top candidates would then enter direct ranking matches, and the overall champion would receive a mythic piece of equipment. That reward ignited every elite student's ambition, especially those from the powerful imperial capital schools, already expecting to dominate the bracket. Mohan waited until the final moment for Shien E, then entered the dungeon only after the vice principal convinced her he had missed the round. A young mage named Ouyang Jing approached her before entry and reminded her their aristocratic families had long discussed a possible marriage alliance. Mohan rejected him immediately, and stated she already had a boyfriend, leaving no ambiguity about where her loyalty rested. Oh Yang-jing kept smiling publicly, but privately decided whoever stood between the two families would eventually have to disappear. The second trial ran for 2 hours, measuring how efficiently students could hunt simulated demons while avoiding point deductions from deaths. Qin Mohan finished first overall with Liu Tianning close behind, forcing the imperial capital students to acknowledge Hunko No. 1's unexpected strength. The 5 deans of Jinghua's major combat colleges gathered to watch the final ranking stage and scout potential disciples. Those colleges represented warriors, mages, summoners, assassins, and archers, each with one recommendation slot for a direct final bracket participant. One of the deans suddenly received a message from someone he treated with extraordinary respect and immediately changed the warrior college recommendation. The new candidate was Shien E, a level 13 civilian who had not completed either of the exam's earlier rounds. The 5 Jinghua colleges specialized in warriors, mages, summoners, assassins, and archers, allowing each dean to compete for promising students before formal enrollment. Their recommendation slots normally went to candidates with proven professions and records, making a civilian nominee look almost deliberately provocative. The Warrior College Dean received a private message from someone he addressed with extraordinary respect and replaced his expected recommendation without argument. He did not fully understand the request himself, but the authority behind it mattered enough to accept Shien E's name, despite the obvious controversy. Other deans immediately questioned whether family influence had corrupted the bracket, since none of them knew what Shien E had done in the Frost-Forbidden Zone. Qin Mohan reacted differently, because the name simply confirmed he had reached the capital and had not abandoned the promise to appear. Oh Yang-jing connected that same name with the boyfriend she had mentioned earlier, turning an abstract romantic obstacle into a specific tournament rival. His family background made him accustomed to alliances being treated as arrangements, so Qin Mohan's direct refusal wounded pride as much as personal interest. The masked asked Shien E to show his profession during their journey, and the genuine civilian label left even her unable to explain his observed abilities. By the time the bracket appeared publicly, Shien E had become the only finalist whose listed profession looked completely incompatible with the level of competition. The recommendation stunned even the dean, who accepted the request because nothing about an ordinary civilian matched Jinghua's historical admission standards. Meanwhile, the masked woman riding beside Shien E asked directly how his profession could possibly see civilian after everything she had witnessed. He temporarily removed the medal's information block and let her see the genuine civilian profession for herself. The evidence only deepened the mystery, because none of his teleportation, strength, defenses, or artifact abilities matched civilian growth rules. Jinghua published the final 32 names, combining top trial scorers with 5 college recommendations. Shien E's name stood out immediately because every other finalist possessed an elite combat profession, while his line simply read civilian. Students who had fought through 2 brutal rounds reacted with open anger, assuming a powerful family had purchased him a prestigious resume entry. The 5 deans quickly realized the Warrior College had supplied the unusual recommendation and demanded to know what its dean was thinking. Qin Mohan saw Shien E's name and understood only one thing. He had reached the imperial capital and still remembered his promise to meet her. Oh Yang-jing learned the civilian finalist was the same boyfriend Qin Mohan had mentioned and immediately redirected his existing hostility towards Shien E. The bracket randomly placed Shien E in the very first match against Oh Yang-ruse, another member of the powerful Oh Yang family. Oh Yang-jing quietly ordered his cousin to humiliate the civilian badly enough that Qin Mohan would remember the defeat. Ruse entered the arena confidently, but Shien E was still racing from the military transport toward Jinghua as the 1-minute deadline counted down. Most spectators assumed the civilian would hide, rather than expose himself before a nationwide audience after receiving a questionable recommendation. Seconds before disqualification, Shien E arrived with enough speed to crash into the arena like a falling meteor. Shien E reached the arena barely before his first scheduled match, arriving dramatically enough that spectators assumed the late civilian was seeking attention. Hunko No. 1 students recognized him immediately, while Qin Mohan's visible relief revealed more about their relationship than either had announced publicly. His opponent, Oh Yang-ruse, belonged to the same powerful family as Oh Yang-jing and possessed the Rock Dragon Mage profession. Ruse considered the profession gap so overwhelming that he offered Shien E 3 unanswered attacks, intending to demonstrate that civilian strength could not break real defenses. Shien E deliberately suppressed much of his power because a full-strength strike against a student would turn an admissions match into a killing. The arena barrier registered the impact cleanly, confirming Ruse had not dropped his defense voluntarily or lost because of an equipment malfunction. Ruse rebuilt a stronger defense before the second attack. Yet that barrier also failed and left him close enough to defeat that the promised third strike became terrifying. Rather than accept the humiliation, Ruse abandoned his own 3-move offer and summoned rock dragon golems to attack before Shien E completed the sequence. Shien E answered with Cold Fury Formation Breaker, finally revealing an active equipment skill, instead of relying on another plain punch. The charged burst crashed through the summons and their master together, ending the official match. Before Ruiz could rebuild control of the arena, Hunko No. 1 recognized him instantly, and Chin Mohan's expression brightened with the relief she had tried to suppress all day. The audience saw only a handsome teenager in ordinary clothes, and concluded his appearance, not combat ability, probably explained the powerful recommendation. The match display showed Shien E at level 13 against Ruse's level 9 Rock Dragon Mage, making the civilian's high level the first real surprise. Ruse promised to grant Shien E 3 free attacks because he wanted the humiliation to last longer than an instant magical victory. Shien E accepted and quietly disabled several equipment and passive effects so an ordinary punch would not accidentally end the match too quickly. His first punch shattered the mage's reinforced shield and removed half Ruse's health before the audience understood he had moved. Ruse insisted the attack must have represented Shien E's maximum strength and erected an even stronger defensive barrier for the second attempt. The second punch broke that shield as well and left him with almost no health, turning his public generosity into his own humiliation. Ruse abandoned the agreement, summoned Earth Golems, and attacked first because staying still for a third punch now looked suicidal. Shien E decided the game had lasted long enough and activated Cold Fury Formation Breaker. A dragon-shaped charge smashed through both golems and Ruse together, ending the match in one spectacular burst. The audience finally understood the gorgeous blue dragon gauntlet was not decorative equipment, though few could identify its actual mythic grade. Outside the protected arena space, Ruse lost control and launched a real surprise attack at Shien E after the official result was already announced. Shien E deflected the spells with his gauntlet and answered with a controlled physical strike that sent the attacker flying without killing him. Ouyang rushed forward furious that his cousin had been injured and tried reframing the retaliation as Shien E's unprovoked cruelty. Ruse attacked again after the result had already been declared, changing the situation from competitive aggression into a violation of tournament rules. Shien E deflected the surprise and returned a controlled punch, refusing to let family status turn a finished match into free retaliation. Ouyang moved to defend his cousin, giving Shien E the first direct confrontation with the man who had already targeted him over Chin Mohan. Their argument exposed the family tension publicly, but Dean Ouyang intervened before either side turned the dispute into an unscheduled fight. The incident also gave spectators a clearer reason for Ouyang hostility than the simple profession hierarchy they had assumed before. Shien E remained more interested in advancing through the bracket than explaining why a civilian could overpower an elite mage. As other matches reduced the field, Lu Tianning emerged as his next important opponent and approached the fight with none of Ruse's contempt. Lu Tianning had already seen enough at their school to believe Shien E was hiding a huge gap, so he asked for genuine strength rather than mercy. He activated Blood Rage, raising both attack and defense, before committing to the exchange that would test his Dragon Slayer class. Cold Fury Formation Breaker ended that test in one hit, giving the Jinghua Deans a clean example against an opponent they already considered highly durable. Shien E reminded everyone Ruse had attacked after losing, and the presiding teacher finally intervened before the dispute became a second fight. The Mage College Dean, Ouyang ended the incident publicly because continued chaos would damage his family's reputation during a national broadcast. Shien E ignored the Ouyang family's anger and returned directly to Chin Mohan, who cared more about his arrival than the spectacle around them. When he learned the championship prize really was mythic equipment, his earlier plan to surrender unnecessary matches changed instantly. Mohan's next fight ended quickly, because Nightwing Flowing Wind placed her beyond the reach of an ordinary melee opponent. The remaining finalists narrowed to 16, and Shien E's next meaningful opponent became Lu Tianing, someone who already respected his true combat ability. Lu Tianing asked Shien E not to surrender or toy with him, because he wanted to measure the real distance between their current strengths. Shien E respected the request and enabled most of his available combat effects before entering the arena. Lu Tianing activated Blood Rage, boosting his attack, heave, and defense while preparing for the strongest frontal clash his Dragon Slayer build could handle. Shien E used Cold Fury Formation Breaker once and erased the Hidden Profession Warrior before a second exchange existed. The match ended so quickly that several deans rose from their seats, trying to understand how a civilian had one-shot a high-defense combat class. Some still blamed unusually high innate strength, arguing civilian growth would eventually collapse, no matter how impressive the early numbers looked. The masked woman watched from the crowd and considered their analysis almost funny after witnessing Shien E kill an actual mythic frost dragon. The quarterfinals continued, and Mohan faced Wen Yashuan, a proud hidden profession archer recommended directly by Jinghua's Archer College. Yashuan specialized in fighting at both close and long range, attempting to pressure Mohan instead of maintaining conventional archer distance. Lu Tianing accepted the loss without excuses, which separated him sharply from students who treated Xian's profession as proof the result must be fraudulent. The speed of the knockout forced deans to consider whether the civilian label represented an unknown growth route rather than a clerical mistake. Mohan's side of the bracket brought a different challenge against Wen Yashuan, a hidden profession archer capable of matching elite ranged fundamentals. Wen Yashuan repeatedly tried controlling distance and timing, but Thunderfeather's bonuses improved the exact mobility and lightning pressure Mohan needed. Nightwing Flowing Wind let change elevation and angle, while Yashuan spent more effort reacquiring a target that refused to stay on one plane. Mohan won without needing Shien E to interfere, preserving her position as a genuine top candidate rather than merely the civilian finalist companion. Ouyang also advanced convincingly, using his Ice Soul Sorcerer transformation to overwhelm a hidden summoner and reinforce his status as tournament favorite. His first transformation advantage at level 10 looked overwhelming by student standards, especially to spectators who still interpreted Shien E through ordinary civilian growth. The final four became Shien E, Mohan, Ouyang and Xuefei, creating a bracket where personal relationships now overlapped with championship stakes. Mohan chose to concede her semifinal against Shien E, preferring his path toward the mythic reward over proving something against someone whose strength she trusted. Thunderfeather's agility bonus and Nightwing Flowing Wind prevented those approaches from succeeding, while lightning effects disrupted Yashuan's rhythm repeatedly. Frustration eventually pushed the proud archer into demanding a direct contest, but Mohan continued fighting intelligently instead of accepting a worse position. A final rain of arrows ended the match and placed Mohan among the strongest remaining freshmen in the country. Another quarterfinal showed Ouyang true advantage. He had already reached level 10 and completed his first professional transformation. His Ice Soul Sorcerer class erased a hidden summoner and all its creatures with one large area frost spell. Most spectators decided that Transformation Gap guaranteed Ouyang the championship, regardless of what the civilian finalists had shown so far. The final four became Shien E, Mohan, Ouyang and the Assassin College's recommended candidate Xuefei. Shien E drew Mohan first, but she refused to attack him and conceded before their match properly began. Her decision irritated spectators who wanted a real fight, yet neither of them had any reason to damage the other for entertainment. Ouyang defeated Xuefei in the other semifinal by combining large area frost, defensive ice mirrors, and a finishing spear. The championship, therefore, became exactly the confrontation both men had been moving towards since Ouyang learned Mohan had chosen Shien E. Ouyang entered furious and promised to take the civilian suffer through every cold and piercing attack available to his transformed mage class. Shien E noticed the same sadistic confidence Ruse had displayed and concluded the Ouyang cousins shared more than a family name. Instead of rushing the mage, Shien E offered Ouyang the same 3 free attacks Ruse had arrogantly granted him earlier. The declaration shocked everyone, because voluntarily letting a transformed mage cast freely looked far more reckless than any strategy Shien E had used before. Ouyang Jing defeated Shuafei in the other semifinal, producing the exact championship confrontation his jealousy had been pushing towards since the second trial. By then, he had watched Shien E beat elite students without revealing anything that looked like a normal civilian skill set. Shien E mirrored Ruse's earlier arrogance back at the family by offering Ouyang Jing 3 unanswered attacks before he would retaliate. The offer was not reckless theater. Magical resistance and accumulated frost resistance made an Ice Soul Sorcerer an especially favorable opponent for his current build. Ouyang Jing interpreted the gesture as insult and decided the first spell would expose every earlier victory as dependence on brute physical power. His opening Ice Spear carried enough force to terrify ordinary finalists, yet Shien E caught and shattered it with his hand rather than dodging. That result forced Ouyang Jing into Ice Soul Storm, a much broader attack intended to remove the possibility of simple physical interception. Shien E walked through the storm because spell reduction handled most magical force while permanent frost resistance erased much of what remained. He even checked his cheap jacket afterward, using the undamaged fabric to emphasize that the supposedly overwhelming transformation had failed to create meaningful damage. The crowd's expectation shifted from waiting for the civilian to collapse into wondering what Ouyang Jing could possibly use for the promised third attack. Ouyang Jing accepted, confident one serious spell would expose the civilian's earlier victories as brute force tricks with no defensive foundation. His first giant ice spear struck Shien E's open palm and shattered without moving him backward a single step. The attack's frost element was so ineffective that the audience initially assumed some hidden defensive item had absorbed the impact. Ouyang Jing escalated to Ice Soul Storm, surrounding Shien E with continuous frozen damage from every direction. Impervious to all magic and the Frost Fang amulet reduced the spell below harmless, while the gauntlet's regeneration covered the small physical residue. Shien E walked through the storm untouched and mocked the transformed mage for failing to damage an ordinary jacket. Ouyang Jing's confidence finally cracked, but he poured everything into the epic staff his family had prepared for his first transformation. The staff summoned an ice dragon attack designed to consume all remaining mana in exchange for overwhelming burst damage. Shien E raised one hand again and let the attack break against frost resistance, exceeding what ordinary professionals could even reach. The third promised move ended with Ouyang Jing empty on mana and emotionally shattered because none of his strongest magic had produced visible damage. Shien E finally crossed the distance and ended the championship with one controlled slap, choosing humiliation over unnecessary lethal force. The arena announced a civilian as winner of Tsinghua University's special entrance ranking, something no previous generation had witnessed. For one moment, even the dean stood while the national audience tried to reconcile everything they had been taught about profession limits. Mohan looked proud rather than surprised, because every new impossible result simply confirmed what she had believed about Shien E from childhood. The championship should have guaranteed Shien E the mythic equipment and first place among the country's strongest incoming freshmen. Ouyang Jing committed his epic staff and remaining mana to the third strike, forming an ice dragon attack intended to end the humiliation decisively. The spell looked dramatically stronger than the first two, but Shien E's defensive advantages were mechanical counters rather than confidence tricks. When the ice dragon broke without producing the expected injury, Ouyang Jing had spent most of the resources supporting his transformed state. Shien E finally crossed the distance, only after allowing all 3 promised moves, making the reversal impossible to dismiss as interrupting the mage before preparation. He used a slap instead of the scythe, gauntlet burst, or execution passive because the opponent was a student whose defeat required control, not death. The single hit ended the championship and left Ouyang Jing publicly beaten by the civilian he had already tacited was beneath Mohan. Tournament rules therefore placed Shien E first among the incoming finalists, and the promised championship reward should have followed before any admissions debate. The Mage College director interrupted that sequence, arguing that Tsinghua existed to cultivate elite combat professions, rather than someone officially classified as civilian. That objection exposed a structural prejudice larger than Ouyang Jing's personal hostility, because administrators were now challenging a result produced under their own rules. Shien E listened long enough to understand they were not disputing what happened in the arena. They were disputing whether his profession deserved recognition afterward. Before Ouyang Yan could announce the award, however, a Mage College admissions director stood and formally challenged the result. His argument had nothing to do with cheating, arena rules, or Shien E's performance, because none of those could be disputed. He claimed Jinghua existed to cultivate elite combat professionals, and admitting a civilian champion would damage the institution's purpose and prestige. The director emphasized that Jinghua historically recruited hidden professions and extraordinary combat classes, never commoners or ordinary support professions. Yang Yan publicly agreed, turning the dispute from one administrator's prejudice into an official decision backed by the head examiner. Across the country, support professionals, who had just watched Shien E win through strength, heard the old hierarchy reasserted immediately after his victory. Yang Yan revoked Shien E's championship qualification, despite the result being earned under the same rules, applied to every other finalist. He then framed himself as generous by announcing Jinghua would make an exception and admit Shien E as its first civilian student anyway. The word transformed a right Shien E had already earned through recommendation and victory into a favor supposedly granted by the Mage College. Many spectators accepted the performance because the institution's historical prejudice toward civilians had been normalized for generations. Dean Ouyang Yan supported the objection and removed the championship status instead of defending the result his own tournament had just produced. He then presented admission itself as generosity, announcing that Jinghua would make an unprecedented exception by accepting its first civilian student. The phrasing demanded gratitude while erasing the fact that Shien E had already defeated every opponent placed between him and first place. Staff surrounding the deans echoed the message, treating access to Jinghua as something a civilian should accept quietly, regardless of how the championship was handled. Shien E compared that posture with the military, where General Su had judged him through results in real demon territory, rather than through the awakening label. He also knew the Mage College's battlefield reputation had declined precisely because institutional pride could not replace experience against actual threats. His criticism, therefore, targeted more than wounded ego, accusing the administrators of protecting profession hierarchy, while other organizations carried greater combat risk. Support professionals and ordinary viewers following the examination now had a public example of the same ceiling they faced, even after performance surpassed expectations. Shien E stopped caring whether the university, because staying under administrators who denied visible results no longer looked like an unquestioned reward. He prepared to reject the arrangement outright, turning the institution's supposed exception into something Jinghua might lose, rather than something he needed to beg for. Shien E saw through it immediately and asked why Ouyang Yan needed so many excuses if the real objective was simply denying him the championship. Mage College staff demanded gratitude, insisting a civilian should be thankful just for receiving permission to enter Jinghua at all. Their response finally exhausted Shien E's patience, because he had already killed mythic demons, held military rank, and won the exam fairly. He called the administrators shameless old men and openly criticized the Mage College's increasingly poor reputation for courage in real anti-demon battles. The insult enraged the entire Mage College delegation. But Shien E no longer cared whether the university admitted him after treating his profession as disqualifying. Before Shien E could finish withdrawing, the masked, gold-armored woman appeared beside him, interrupting the dispute without asking permission from the admissions officials. Her arrival instantly changed the posture of people who recognized more than the armor, even though most students had no idea who had entered. Shien E knew only the woman who Frost Dragon honored their wager, and possessed enough influence to place him directly into this tournament. She did not begin by defending his combat record or debating whether civilian counted as a worthy profession. Instead, her attention moved past the admissions directors toward the person whose authority sat above the argument, consuming the arena. The woman called the name Dongfang Xing with the same cold command she had used while facing mythic danger in the Forbidden Zone. Ordinary spectators initially reacted with confusion because the name was not part of the student bracket or the deans they had been watching. Jinghua's upper echelon reacted differently, their expressions changing the moment they understood whom she had summoned in public. Dongfang Xing was the head vice dean, placing the masked woman's demand directly above the administrators who had just rewritten Shien E's result. Shien E remained beside the masked woman as the admissions dispute abruptly reached Dongfang Xing. the head vice dean, whose authority towered over the arguing administrators.